Okay, so I'm going to take this cannon. We are currently in the high resolution model stage. And I'm going to take this high resolution model. If you notice, it's got these different colors. The reason for that is we're going to use these different colors for the material ID later on in substance painting. These colors represent material types, and I'm going to probably combine all the certain material types together. You've got bronze, the red is wood, and then the kind of off green is steel. And this is not what I would want the colors to look like in the actual model. Like obviously in the final texture, it will have real world colors that aren't bright red and bright orange. But what this does is it makes it so that we can use these bright colors as a masking tool when we make our final bake, and we'll be able to instantly grab the material ID in Substance Painter, apply bronze to the bronze, steel to the steel, and wood to the wood, and the masks will already be set up for us because we're using material IDs. This works in Substance Painter quite well. It works really well if you come from ZBrush with Polypaint and then you send that to Substance Painter and you use the vertex color instead of the material ID. But since we're exporting out of Maya in this situation, the material ID color, and these are all just basic like Lamberts and Fongs, but the material ID color will be transferred over into the material ID map in Substance Painter. When we bake it, the thing that we have to realize is that the frustrating thing is, at least with Substance Painter 1, I'm not sure about Substance Painter 2, but I seem to have a limit of about like 3 or 4 materials exporting from Maya using this color system, which is one of the reasons I like to use ZBrush to color my materials. But all we're trying to do is create bright colors, makes it easy to select them in Substance Painter, create a mask, and that way I can say this is bronze, this is steel, and this is wood. But I'm going to get started. I'm going to start making the LOD0. We're going from high res to LOD0. And anytime I'm doing that, there are some things we can think about, like sometimes you do use a high res model and just kind of reduce it down. Sometimes you do use the proxy and kind of use that. But most of the time I find you have to recreate the object altogether. And the reason is it's just going to take too much of my time to reduce this high res, and also the high res was created not to look good in a low res form. The high res was created to be smooth. So I could take this high res and it would take a long time to reduce it down. It's a lot easier just to recreate the model, and I'm going to show you how right now. So I've got this cannon, it's angled up. I left the rotation value in, I didn't freeze the transformations. And so its rotation is what, 0.8 or 8 degrees, minus 8 degrees. I can remember that for later because that's good for knowing what angle this cannon should be at. But in order to recreate the new cannon, it's going to be easiest if I just flatten it out. Because this way I can create a cylinder. I don't have to worry about the alignment or anything, but I'm going to create a brand new cylinder, and it's going to go over the cannon. We'll do most of the stuff will just be done by creating the cylinder and moving things around, but eventually there will be parts like this part here that I have to do some surface manipulation to the low res, and in that case I do a thing called quad draw, and it's when you make this object live. There's this little horseshoe up here. You make this object live, and you can go into quad draw, which is in the toolkit, the modeling toolkit. Quad draw is down in tools. That's your multi-cut. If the object is live, the wireframe should show up green, and so let's see, let's put wireframe unshaded. Yeah. And so if it's green, what it means is that using quad draw and moving around on an object, it will, everything that I do will stick to this object. So I can draw with quad draw 3 dots. I I hold down Shift and create a square in the center, and it's totally adhered to the surface of this model. So that's how I'm going to do more complicated parts. But because this is a cylinder, because it's a mathematical geometry, I don't want to start that way. It's going to take way too much time. So I'm just going to cheat and create a cylinder. And when I do this, I can rotate it into the position, into the flat 90-degree position. And then if I want to align it with this other cylinder, instead of using make live, which will snap it to any part of the surface, but it's not necessarily any specific vertex, it's just the surface. I'm going to turn off make live. I'm going to snap it, this cylinder to this star in the center of the cylinder of the cannon. And it's wonderful to keep these stars in your models, because these on cylinders, on wheels, on a gun or something like that, it's the center point, so it makes it a good place to snap rotation values, or in this case, the lod0 to get started. And so this is, the cylinder is going to be my final LOD model. And there's something I need to double check on it, is that I need to make sure the roundness spans are going to work for the distance of my camera. LODs these days, the level of detail level of detail 0 is what LOD0 means. Level of detail 0, we call it level of detail 0 because there's going to usually be level of detail 1, level of detail 2, level of detail 3. Each one of those are lower resolutions than the level of detail 0, which is the one that you see when you're right up close. So if I was playing a game and I came up to this cannon and I looked at it with my camera, I want to make sure that I'm not seeing any polygons in that view. So what do? I will isolate this cylinder on its own. I'll look at it from the distance that the game camera would most likely be looking at it, and then I'm going to determine what looks good as far as how many polys this cylinder needs. So let's turn off wireframe unshaded, and I want to see the silhouette. If you go to 6 and then 7, if you have no lights in your scene, it just goes to black, and you can see the silhouette. And what I'm noticing is that there is some polygons visible from this distance. So it's not enough polys at this subdivision axis of 20. So I'm going to change that. I can change it to whatever I want, but as it just happens to be with the cylinder, a division of 4 is going to be very helpful, because of the cross in the center makes it very easy to both align UVs and just kind of symmetry and all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to keep the division as a multiple of 4, and we're going to set it to the subdivision axis of 32. And this looks pretty good from the camera distance. I'm not seeing any polygons. We're not too high. It's still pretty clean, but I'm not seeing any polygons. And that's what's most important about the poly count. I don't set poly limits. And one of the main reasons is most of the time in the industry, you're not given specific poly limits. What you're given is, does it look good from this camera angle? Do we need those polys? If it, basically you want to make sure it's just completely optimized to the camera view that you're seeing. So you want to make a really, really clean model, but you also don't want a lot of detail elements that you don't need, that don't show up from your game camera. So this being what I'm thinking the render is going to be, I just need to make sure that it looks good from this angle. And so 32 looks good, and I'm going to start by, instead of making live and trying to do this all by hand, I'm just going to really quickly move my bounds of this model from the furthest point to the furthest point here. I'm going to just kind of scale them up and down, and then where I see areas in which the silhouette needs attention, I'm going to add an edge span, and I can go ahead at this point and put the high-res layer, which I have the Canon high-res on a layer. I will turn that into a reference layer by just clicking this button down here. Will once it gets to R, it's a reference layer. That means I can't touch it. I can't accidentally grab it. And this way, it'll just be in the background, and I'll scale it up. These spans up and down by what I'm doing is using the multi-cut. I'm holding down Control, creating a span, and then I will double-click on the span to select that edge loop, and then I can scale it up and down. And this is the reason why I wanted to start with a cylinder that's in the geometric space. Is just incredibly fast to recreate a geometric cylinder if I'm using a geometric cylinder. So I'm going to now try to match the silhouette, and I'm just looking at it. I'm not using any special tools. I'm just looking at it and resizing these edge loops. And just starting simple is the best way to go, because everything takes more time if it's more complicated. So I'm always just going to start simple and then work through all this. So here you can see that maybe the silhouette is probably not right. If I turn off this layer, it's a little too pointy, so I do need another edge span there. And then that's going to be pretty easy. I just move this over to one side, go back to my toolbox, and then add, holding down Control and multi-cut, add this edge span, double click it, and I can scale it up. And that's probably what I'm looking for as far as the silhouette, so that it's not too sharp there. I don't want any extra polys. I just want exactly the polys that I need. So this way I'm going through, just kind of looking at everything and going through and adding an edge span wherever I need it. And this is going to be the quickest way to work out the LOD0 for the Canon. There's all kinds of other ways to make your LOD0s. This just is going to be the fastest because the Canon is geometric and perfect shape. Any object that is organic, like a car or there's some more organic cannons out there that aren't just cylinders, or some sort of monster shape one. I've seen some pretty interesting Chinese cannons. Those will generally need, you could start it with a geometric simple shape, but eventually you're probably going to need to use quad draw to get the shape right. But for a simple cylinder, it's a piece of cake to just kind of go through and rescale any edge loops to match the silhouette. And the most important thing about the LOD0 is that it matches the silhouette. And the reason why I'm not using a proxy, the reason why I'm not using the high res to get started here, is because the whole thing here is just completely different as far as the polyflow. The polyflow, I don't need all these like polys in the center of these two ridges here. I don't need any extra polys. I can just use these polys. This is a LOD0, it's supposed to be in-game, so as long as these polys don't buckle or look weird in the normals, I can keep them long. Usually you don't really want polygons this long if it's high res, but if it's a low res, sometimes you're optimizing and you want a really long stretch with no extra edge loops. If you have unlimited polys, you want quads, squares everywhere, everything to be geometrically kind of quadded out with squares. But in this case, because it's an optimized in-game model, we don't want extra polys. I'm just kind of leaving big spans as simple as I can. There's a lot of objects that end up being geometric kind of simple shapes to begin with. But usually what happens is you have a simple geometric shape to begin with, and then you'll get in at some point for the more organic shape. And exactly when that happens here is because of this spot. I do need these to not be separate objects. These have to be stitched together because the cannon is all one shape. And so this would be the one area in which I'm going to use some quad draw or some special tools to fix up those areas. I'll probably start with a cylinder for this low res, or for this the smaller axle cylinder, but the idea would be that to get all of the shape just right, exactly right, I'm probably going to use quad draw to match certain things. Again, this is not like mathematically perfect because I'm scaling it by eye, but it tends to work pretty well as long as your silhouette is on the same shape as the high res. Something looks a little weird. Okay, so this area in which there's a little bit rounder edge to the muzzle of the cannon, I do need some extra spans. Remember, we don't want polygons to really be visible from the camera, from the game camera point of view, or in this case, the render camera point of view. And if I pull off the Canon high-res layer, we want to look at that shape from a distance that we would be seeing it, see if we're seeing any faceting polygons. And right there, I could totally see one. So I'm going to need an extra edge span right there. We'll just kind of massage this out so that there's just like, usually if you see a poly, it's just kind of sort of, you see a poly from this camera angle, you just need 1 or 2 extra edge spans and that'll clean up the issue. I just want to be clear that you want to avoid faceted polys, especially in the silhouette. The other places to avoid them are if you see it here and then a normal's baked down and there's really low res polygonal shapes kind of buckling in and out, you will see those polys. This doesn't really have anything that will do that, but you will see polys if it's not just the silhouette, but if it's the actual interior and the poly itself is buckled. I'll give you an example. Is if anything is doing this, and even though maybe it's not showing up in your silhouette, that shape, because low res, will be very, very obvious when there's texture on it. You're going to see that it's polygonal. So what you want to do when anytime something is bumping out is either bake it into the flat geometric kind of poly world, or you create more and more geometry, because you want to think about the high res being, the base, and the low res is kind of almost shrink wrapped around the high res. You want to think of it matching the silhouette, but not adding any more complexity than is already there. You want to keep it as simple. So it's almost like you're shrink wrapping it with shrink wrap is plastic. When you suction plastic to an object, it'll kind of soften it a little bit. And when you soften things, the normals will look a little better than if you're trying to get every facet. So in reality, for the LOD0, you want to kind of think of it as if it's kind of gently going around the model. It has to match the silhouette 100% if possible, but anywhere where it doesn't is okay, as long as polys aren't visible or clearly obvious. So from these distances, and I always turn the high res off to make sure nothing looks weird on its own. I can see there's just a few edges that aren't lining up exactly, but from these distances, I just try to make sure that everything feels right. It's really easy to scale the circles up and down when it's a full cylinder. If I was to cut this in half, like I'm probably going to have to do at some point, then the scaling would be to whatever pivot point center is. You can always move your pivot point, snap it to the center of the world, or the star in the center of the cylinder. And you do that by hitting D. You can move a pivot point, snap it to the cylinder, and then you can scale it in and out. So just very important if you're scaling up circles, edge loops like that, that you are scaling them geometrically from the center. Otherwise, everything will get all skewed. All right, so from here, most of that looks pretty good. I haven't done the back yet, but from here, most of that's going to work pretty well. And then I'm going to do this interior a little more intensely. Let's see. If I hit on the layers, if I click this button until it goes to T, which is great, that it does this kind of transparent model where you can see the wireframe, but you can't actually see the model. That's going to be perfect for this next step in which I want to extrude the muzzle inward. Because it is a video game, you're probably going to want to be able to see down the cannon hole, the muzzle of the cannon and everything, so we should extrude this in. I was just making sure that I had all the spans kind of worked out before I extruded in the interior of the cannon. Okay, so the easiest way to do this is when you have a vertex in the center of your cylinder, you can just grab that vertex, control right click, and convert that. Control right click will set you up to be converting to another selection. So I'm going to convert my vertices to faces, and then it selects that edge. I could just as easily grabbed it just by selecting it, but any kind of little trick to speed up time really helps. And so I extrude it out. I'm just going to give one more little ridge here for that curve of the cannon. It's really soft right there. And then we'll extrude it again. And I'm using my just normal scale instead of extrude because instead of the extrude scale, because I want to scale from the center, not from whatever, not from the individual poly. It just kind of is more geometric and correct. So I'll extrude all the way down to the hole of the cannon, and then we'll pull this in. This one can go back pretty far, but really we need to go all the way back since you really could probably care less to see all the way down the cannon. That's not really as important as just having a hole there. Okay, so I've done this side. That's looking pretty good. If you notice, there's some hard edges here because of the extrudes and everything. What I'll do is mesh display, soften edge. That softens the normals. When you see when I do that, we have this dark normal issue right here because of this 90-degree turn that's happening. It's just a little too much for the normals to handle. So the easiest solution is to add one more edge span right there, and that'll give the normals kind of perfect rounding math. It's just, you just need an extra edge coming to these corners. You don't want to do edges everywhere, you just want to do exactly what you need, and in this case, an extra edge right around this corner really helps with that normal situation. So from here, the cannon looks pretty good. That looks like almost right. Just maybe one more edge right here, just because of how soft it really is supposed to look in the muzzle front. And then everywhere else, well, yeah, we could probably use one more here too. I don't like overdoing it. Try to keep it as optimized as possible, but if you do see it from the camera view, it is something that you want to fix. So in this case, this one should probably bulge out a little more than how I had it. But yeah, I want to really make sure that the silhouette is matching exactly, and then any kind of extra things, just get it as close as possible. This is not going to be 100% because it's a lower resolution, but as long as I can get it pretty damn close, we're going to do all right here. So there we go. Yeah, now if I look at the silhouette from here, that's totally what I'm looking for. Looks pretty good. I'm not seeing any major polygons from this angle, and usually what I do is I go in a little closer than what the camera would view, and that really helps to determine the polygon count. Here we've got this sphere at the end, and I still need to recreate that part. So grab this center point here, control, right click, two faces. It's converting that vertice that I selected to faces, and since that vertice is connected to 32 faces here, it selects them all at once. It's very helpful. So we'll do an extrude here. Pull it out. I'm just going to kind of do what I was doing before, matching the silhouette as closely as possible. I do imagine that this angle is probably a little too extreme for having one poly. This angle right here is really extreme, so I'm definitely going to have to add one more edge right here to soften that roundness there. Usually don't want to see a sharp edge on the silhouette. That's going to be pretty bad. Looks like something moved. Did something move? Yeah, something moved. That's a problem. Wait, no, that's that. I see. Looks. No, it's just these ones back here didn't look. Somehow maybe things moved around. Center point's the same. We should be good. Everything's on top of each other. The only thing is that these somehow are not lining up right now. I just got to move them again. Usually if I get them lined up, I'm happy with them. I move on. And if I see them out of place, it's a pretty good sign something went weird at some point. But maybe I just didn't do these cleanly enough. Somehow these got moved. I don't know why, but they don't look right. Moving them. Always got to double check everything. Most important thing always is that the silhouette matches the high res. And if it doesn't, you got to fix it. It's just pretty simple. So let's see. All right, nothing looks too different or changed. So okay, so now I can finish fixing up this back part. We'll do, let's just select these polys here on the very back and do some extrudes. Hitting G to do another extrude. So I'll do an extrude, move it around. I hit G. G will do the last tool you use. In this case, it was extrude, but it could be smooth or weld or anything like that. It's the last component tool that you touched. So it just kind of, it's the extrude, and then Y will do the last tool that you use. So if you're using multi-cut, Y will just kind of go back to multi-cut. But since I'm just use extrude, I can hit G again, it extrudes again, and I'm just going to kind of scale this into a place where from here, that looks mostly like a the kind of round sphere at the end of this cannon here. Get it almost perfect to the silhouette. Try to match it as closely as possible. You can see this one edge is not. Almost it seems like it's asking for one more span to look good from this distance. But let's check it out. Let's see. This is always the best way to see how many polygons you need, is if you just get away, you get to the distance of the camera, turn off the high res, we'll look at it here and see if we're seeing any faceting or polygons. And I'm looking at it here, I do just kind of see something that will bug me in the final render. So this one polygon seems like we need one more span here. And then that'll probably be the end of this. Okay, that probably looks good. Let's look at it without the the high res, and I'll just grab my Canon and do a mesh display, soften edge, and when I do that, now we get to see this is kind of the final low res game geometry. Looks pretty good. It does flatten out a little bit here, but I think pull this one. Yeah, that's kind of what I want. I just don't want it to look like it's a triangle sticking out at the end. Everything else feels pretty good. Okay, so this is the main Canon fuselage kind of worked out. Then we've got the hole in there. We've got an extra edge span in there. And then the major issue, the complicated part, is that extra cylinder that is the axle of the Canon that we do need to stitch all together, because otherwise we won't get that kind of perfect Canon look. So, so what I'm going to do is going to, I already did this. I created 2 spans around the area in which the axle is going to show up. And then instead of trying to extrude it, I'm going to create a cylinder that matches this cylinder, and then we'll stitch these 2 together, and then we'll use some quad draw to make sure that stitch is clean. So let's make a cylinder that matches this. It does look like something moved again. Just want to make sure that our model has to be 100% on top of itself. Otherwise, like anything like this where you see your silhouette and it's not on top of itself, that will cause major issues. And I don't know how this side worked and the other side didn't. Let's see. Let's just get one side looking great, and then I'll make sure that the other side matches. Okay, so somehow the Canon moved a little bit, and just got to be aware of that. Anytime you accidentally brush the Canon, it moves slightly. You can sneeze on it and it moves. That can create an issue because the silhouettes won't line up then. So you're always going to have to kind of double check to make sure that your silhouettes are lined up exactly. And if you want to move the Canon, even though it's on, we've already got this this kind of worked out in the place that it is. But if you want to move the Canon, we have to make sure that we are moving the high res as well. If you just decide to move this over here, these are not in the same space, so you gotta do something to fix that. So what I do if I'm ever having to move it, like right now, it's just not in the right space. It's a little too high or a little too low here. I'm gonna select them both, and then I can move them both at the same time, and that way I'm not ruining their spatial relationships. Just noticing that there's something off in the symmetry or whatever. So what I'll do is make sure that my pivot point is dead center in my model, and because it's a cylinder, it should be dead center on that star point. And then now I can move my model wherever I want, and this way I can actually snap to the center point of the Canon. And then now I know that they are directly on top of each other. I keep accidentally 3. You don't want to hit 3. You want to just look at it at 1, and this is your game model. So I snapped it to the center. Now you can see there's no kind of one side too close or one side too far. But then I'm also realizing that there is we are a little too far forward. So the center is right, but our spacing, the back and forth spacing isn't. So I'm going to move that. That looks exactly right. This is usually what you want to see with your low res. Is that it almost looks like some sort of artifact because they're so tightly on top of each other, and that usually does it. Yeah, I just want to make sure. If I hit this at 0, where does it go? Just scooter. So make sure that same spot. Okay. Yeah, I just over and over and over again, we always have to double check to make sure that things are lined up. If I think I accidentally scooted something at some point in the creation here, and that always causes problems. And I notice students always there's always something that's off, or there's always going to, whenever there's an issue, it's usually because something is off from the low res not matching the high res exactly. So I try to keep a really close eye on that and make sure that we're not accidentally breaking it and then just kind of ignoring it. Double checking things is a big part of working in CG. Everything needs a million double checks to make sure we're clean and good. Anyway, this looks great. I'm ready to move on to the next stage, which is the cylinder here. And in the very same way that I created the cannon fuselage, I'm going to create this cylinder by creating another cylinder, looking at it at the scale and the perspective that it's going to be in the render view, and that'll help me understand how detailed this little cylinder needs to be. So first off, we will just put it in the same space, and I can do that again by if I change the pivot point on this model to the center point of the star of the cylinder, I can snap that to the center point of the star of the axle cylinder, which I did leave in there on purpose. And then I can scale it up and down so it's the right size. And then here, what I'm going to do is look at it on its own from the distance that it would be rendered, just about this distance. And if I look at it on its own, I can tell whether or not it needs polys or needs maybe to be reduced polys. Because what I'm looking for is a clean circle. That looks very clean. It definitely does not need more polys. 20 spans around is a lot. So maybe we bring it down to 16. That still looks pretty good. It would be 16. If we wanted to bring it down even more, it would be 12. 12, you start to see the polys there. So let's leave it at 16. These are all divisions of 4 because when you're making cylinders, the cross is really helpful. But yeah, so at 16, it looks good from that distance. And then if we look at those two pieces together, we are going to have to stitch them somehow. So what I'm going to do is just kind of move this to the right kind of area here. And then I'm going to delete some polys here in which we need some new polys to kind of manage this area. So I'm going to delete these polys. At this point, because I've done all this work in it with a perfect cylinder, it's been very easy, but I'm at this point going to want to cut it in half so I don't have to do this twice. So I'm just selecting 1/2 of the cannon model. Pretty happy with how it looks. So 1/2, and then I've got this one here and this one here, and there we need to make sure there's an open hole between the two. So I'm going to cut this back hole, or this back poly off. We don't need that back one. Now I have an open hole between these two, and I'm going to combine them, and we're going to figure out how to stitch it up as soon as we combine it. So let's use mesh combine. Now these two are the same object, and what I'm going to do is take that cannon fuselage as we had it before, and I'm going to make it a live object. That's this button up here. The big horseshoe makes selected object live. I click that, turns green, and now when I have this object, and because I want to see them just on their own, what I'll do is you can't select an object after it's live, so what I'll do is I'll select them both, isolate select view, that's this button here, and then I will make the high res live, and then we can turn it into a transparent object. And then now when I use quad draw, I will be sculpting polys directly onto the high res cannon. So we're no longer eyeballing it with geometry. I'm going to go down here in the toolkit to quad draw. Quad draw is a wonderful tool for creating polys over a high res. For faces and organic objects, you usually can just use quad draw. It works by creating 4 points and then holding down shift will turn those into a polys. Holding down Shift and clicking on the poly will relax it. It doesn't really make sense here, but it does kind of soften things up on organic objects. And then, there is an extrude. I think it's Control and Shift. No, that wasn't it. If you ever looking for the keyboard shortcuts on QuadDraw, they are in the toolkit. They're just down here, keyboard mouse shortcuts. So we can drag this down and look at all of your keyboard shortcuts. And I'm looking for extrude. So drag to draw quad script. Okay, tab is what I'm looking for. So tab and middle mouse will create an extrusion, and that's exactly what I want to do a lot of times. But a lot of QuadDraw, you can just kind of use QuadDraw, click, creating these points, hold down Shift to create a polygon in between 4 points. And that's why it's called QuadDraw, because of the 4-point system. It also does weld your vertices together. So in this case, maybe I didn't put these together, but if I'm not holding anything down, I'm just bringing it right up to the thing. Because of the tolerance that we have here with auto weld, it will just automatically weld there. Here, the polygon's missing. Create an extra point, hold down Shift, and now I can kind of do the whole edge loop this way. And I could hold down Tab and do extrudes, and it will do an extrusion of your edge loop. And that's probably the fastest way to take care of this. I know I just wanted to show off a little bit in QuadDraw. If you get rid of all of the points that I've created, hold down Tab, it should just pull that whole edge loop in. And that's exactly what I want here. I just want to make sure it feels clean. The other thing is I do need it to match up to the bigger object here. And most of the time, these polys are going to be enough, but I think I want one more here and here. Notice, because I'm adding with QuadDraw, it is kind of suctioning it in. And that's kind of what QuadDraw is all about, is that it shrink wraps everything to the high-res object. That, kind of sucks because my original one wasn't exactly perfect, but if using QuadDraw, just click on some of these objects or some of these verts, it should not extrude. I'm just going to move it. Yeah, slide it. It will kind of stitch everything. Sometimes it doesn't do it quite as cleanly as you would want it, but it does kind of suction in everything. When you're using slide, it suctions everything into the model, and because this model is geometric, it's not really looking too bad. So I'm just suctioning it in. When I do this and I'm using a symmetrical model, it will just slightly make some of these edges not exactly symmetrical or stuck to the center line. So I'm going to select these edges and just make sure they're always stuck to the center. If you're ever, you can see kind of goes off a little bit right there. If you're ever off on your center, those aren't going to weld. So what I do is I just make sure that my move snap settings, retain component spacing is turned off in the move tool. I'm going to hold down X for grid snap, and I will grid snap everything to the center here. I do it there, and I'll do it down here as well. What that is doing when I have QuadDraw selected is it's grid snapping it to the center, but it is still adhering to the high-res model. So as you can see, I just clicked in the center of this edge loop. It just kind of shrink wraps everything into place, but when it does that, it often interrupts the center. So I'm just going to hold down X and make sure that I'm grid snapping those edges to the center. You can see there's other areas in which it maybe QuadDraw could kind of clean up a little things here, here. It just always is going to be a little better if things look this way, where you see both the model and the low res and the high res kind of in the same space, and I can tell that I didn't give enough kind of ins and outs on some of those places, and and likewise with maybe this right here. But once all that's in place, and none of it was terrible, it all should work fine. But once that's all in place, I'm going to select that center again, because there are some chances that that center point moved around, and just make sure I grid snap to the center here. I'm going to turn off live because I'm just a little worried about things moving up and down with quad draw when I'm grid snapping. I really just need this grid snap to be centered, and then this thing should be symmetrical, no problem. Okay, so let's go back to the quad draw thing, and if I undid the object being live, that's because I click this button, and now the object is no longer live. I'll make it live again, and the main thing that's going to be useful for is creating the connection point between the larger part of the cannon and the smaller part of the cannon. So now let's go back to quad draw. I'm going to start thinking about how to connect all of these various things. So we've got quad draw, and I want to use this vert, snap that vert, that's great. I'll move these verts around so that they're a little more flowing with the natural direction of the model. And then here with quad draw, we can kind of begin to start certain things. Sometimes holding down shifts give you exactly what you want, like in this case, this is perfect. Sometimes here, it's just not going to work because this is not a this is a concave poly, and quad draw knows to not create concave polys. It doesn't want to create triangles. That's the only problem with quad draw. I do have a system working around that, and it's a pen polygon tool. It's under mesh tools, append to polygon. This is going to create either polygons, quads, n-gons, or what I want to do in this case is triangles. So this is the one thing that quad draw isn't good at, is creating triangles. So I'm going to click the append polygon tool and click one edge and another, and it'll just create a little triangle there. And same with this interior part right here. As long as I have my model selected and I do append, I should be able to click an edge, click another edge. It automatically creates a triangle, and that's the way I want to deal with that edge there. So that's a pen polygon tool. It's the one other tool that I use besides quad draw. It's an older tool and still works really well. So I have been using it still, even though quad draw is awesome. I think the object is still live, is it? I can always tell because you can never move a vert past the object if it's live. I think it's pink because it's in the layers. It's a reference layer. So, but I'll move this around so this flow feels right. We'll do quad draw where it works. Here that seems fine. Here that seems fine. That seems fine. This one, this one, this one, and then the triangle. Yeah, it did work in the end. Okay, so quad draw did work with the triangle in the end. Okay, so here, yeah, it looks all right, but the real test is going to be what it looks like when we turn off the high res and look at it with its own normals, trying to understand if those normals are working well enough. So here, there's one little edge that I haven't put in, this little kind of curve at the end. I know it's a lot of detail for that much, or for this low res. But what's going to be great is if I add an extra edge here, it both gives the feeling of more detail, and then also we get that curve around the high res there. And if I turn off the high res, it doesn't look like a hard 90-degree turn, and that's going to make the normals look better too. So I usually have an extra edge span whenever you have a 90-degree turn. I try to keep them as simple as possible, but it works out really well. Extra edge loop here, extra edge loop here. Now I have to do a mesh display soften edge, otherwise we don't know what it really looks like. And as you can see, some of these triangles ended up not looking very good. There's a little bit of funkiness. And so sometimes I will add an extra edge loop. In this case, I'm just going to kind of rearrange these so that there's a little better flow to them. This is the case in which it's all right to just kind of manipulate it just a little bit. But the reason why I'm doing this is I think if the flow is better, there won't be as many normal artifacts or issues. So just a little more flow, trying to, you know, like the cleaner the model is, the better this whole thing works out when we do mesh display soften edge. So mesh display soften edge, this is the final model. Most of it looks pretty good. I do see there's a little funkiness here, and it's because of that sharp turn here. And maybe at this point I can just kind of adjust these a little bit, just moving in and out until that kind of buckling is just as limited as possible. Okay, yeah, something was wrong. So somehow I must have moved it. Yeah, I just moved it. That happens all the time. You accidentally grab the object mode and you click on it while it's in live, and it just moves it real fast. Moving it back into place by you know, going with the center point does help, but in this case I'm just undoing. And because everything looks right, other than this one edge here, but most things look right, I'm going to assume that we're pretty good and happy with moving to the next stage. So, one edge it feels like it's a little too big, just a little, the angle's not quite right, so I'm rescaling it, but again, I need to make sure that pivot point is in the center instead of in the center of this curve, which is only half. So if I move it to the center, then when I scale it, it's scaling from the center of the cannon, and that makes sense. Okay, so turn off the high res. Now I get to look at the low res, make sure everything's feeling right. Something like some minor artifacts here and there aren't too bad. Anything major would be an issue. Here, I'll show you something major. If you delete one of these edges, you can see how dark that cylinder gets, and that's a major issue. So let's go back, undo. This is what I want. I am about ready to move on to the next stage of this piece, which would be UVing it. And I'm going to do that here, but I need to get through the other stuff because we have to UV this whole cannon all at once. If we look at, you know, what's due this week, it is not a bunch of different pieces all UV'd separately. It's one cannon with one normal map and one UV sheet. Everything needs to be 0 to 1. So it's kind of easier if you just build everything and then put it all together rather than trying to UV and then, because you've got to fit all of these things together. So I'm going to build the low res, make sure it looks great, and then I'm going to UV it. That's usually the fastest way to pipeline something. Just like the pipeline says, we will do the high res, we'll make the low res, and then we'll UV it. That is our pipeline. So right now I'm in the low res version of, or the low res stage of the pipeline, and then I will move on to making the chassis, the wheels, and the rest. But after I make all those, then I'm going to UV it all together. Okay, so cannon part does kind of end up being the most complicated. I am going to mirror this. Actually, I don't need to really mirror the UVs, but that is often a reason why I wait to mirror, is because the UVs sometimes are mirrored, and in this case, I think I'm only going to make one chassis and one wheel, but the cannon itself will not be mirrored as far as the UVs. It's going to be 100% unique UVs over the whole thing. But the chassis and the wheels, I will make sure that I only make one of them because I don't need two. One wheel will work great. So that being said, let's move on to the wheels. And I'm going to focus specifically on the wheel and the axle. You can see it's got a lot of bolts and stuff here. I can use the quad draw on this, but I want to speed things up. I don't want to do all of these struts individually. So why don't we just go ahead and get started with some geometric solids, and then we will add these extra details like this this little bolt here, which is not going to be easy just to put in as a geometric solid because it should be stitched in. It's going to be cheaper and easier to do if it's stitched in, and but the struts could be separate. So I'm going to try to figure out the fastest way to do this. And the first thing would be to create some sort of torus or a ring that matches the wheel as it is. The other thing I can do is I can make this live, but if you notice there are a bunch of different objects. You got your bolts, you've got your axles, and your ridge, the metal ridge around the edge. So because they're all different pieces, it's going to be harder to make it live. So what I do, you don't really need the bolts for these. Bolts, I'm going to ignore bolts from the silhouette. I know they do break the silhouette slightly, but we're going to pretend like they don't, because it's a lot easier to bake bolts into a flat surface than it is to try to make round geometry that fits each bolt. The other way you can make bolts is by actually having them being separate spheres, but if you bake them to a flat plane, they will look pretty damn good. So I'm going to remove the bolts, but what I'm going to do is instead of messing with this high res, what I'll do is make sure that I create a copy of the high res to do a bunch of this new stuff too. So this is lod0. I'm just going to put this on a layer so I can hide it for a second. This is the cannon I'm already done with. I can move on. But the wheels, I want to make them into a single object so I can make it live. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to remove it from my Canon proxy layer and my Canon proxy group. This will be its own thing, and I'll just call this layer snap layer. It's just for random objects that need to be snapped. And you notice these are smooth. These are not just what is it, the subdivision surface preview. These are actually smooth. These are mesh smooth. It's because the subdivision preview doesn't work in the object live. You won't get the same results if you're using the subdivision preview. And again, that's when you have low res poly and you hit 3 and it goes like this. If I snap to like I tried to make this object live and do quad draw to this cube, I can't draw on the cube or on the sphere because it's drawing on the cube. It's drawing on the cube instead of the sphere, and that creates a major issue. So if you are using any live object, you have to make sure that it's mesh smooth, not just poly preview smooth. And these are, there's already been mesh smooth. I'm going to get rid of these bolts and just make sure that this is named. Oh, let's make sure that I didn't delete my high-res bolts. Yeah, bolts are outside. Okay, but if I select these bolts, they're all as one object, makes things a little easier. I'll get rid of this. I'll call this layer again snap group. I just want to make sure that Canon high-res still has bolts. It does. Cool. I didn't delete the actual bolts. Okay, so this is all what I'm going to use to snap the wheels to. Select it all, and we're going to combine it into one object. And since I really only have to do one wheel, we'll just delete the other wheel. We don't need to look at it. It's going to get in the way. So now I've got this wheel. Make sure it's in my snap layer. I'll call this wheel snap. Snap. And then now I need to figure out how I'm going to create this. So first thing, easy thing would be to create a polyprimitive. You can use a torus or a pipe. Actually works really well. Pipes are basically flat toruses. Just the math is a little cleaner. And then rotate it 90 degrees. I'm going to snap it to the dead center point of this cylinder, because that should be the pivot point center. Holding down V, snapping to the vertice center. It's Is that object live? What's it on? Nope. Okay, so I should be able to snap it. Yeah, it is snapping. I just it's taking it. Snap to the vertice center of the axle. That means that is the rotation axis. Now we can change this pipe's radius to be more appropriate. And then now let's take a look at this from the camera distance. If we remember, we have to look at this from the distance that the camera is going to be seeing it as, and try to make an assumption of how many polys we need. So right now, if we look at that silhouette without the snap layer, look at that silhouette, incredibly faceted pipe here, and we need more polys. So right, it was at subdivision 20. Let's see what 32 does here. 32 looks pretty good, but I swear I'm still gonna see just a little bit of faceting. So let's go up another division of 4. We can do 36. It's a little better, and why don't we just do 40? And 40 is a good place to set. That looks pretty decent. So that is one way to get your poly count figured out. Is just look at it from this distance. If you can see polys, then you should add more geometry. If you can't see polys, you should leave it at that complexity. Okay, let's turn our snap layer back on. I will try to, I'll just select these both and do isolate select so I'm focused on them. And I will try to kind of get this into exactly the right scale. And this is one of those situations where I'm using numbers, so maybe snapping by hand might be a little better, but I think this is going to work. I'll get the width scale perfect. And that inner scale, what is that? The thickness? Yeah, put that in. Okay, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so the other thing would be, let's see, if it is a if it's a division of 6. Let's see, I don't even know. Like, it's been a while since I looked at timetables, but is 40 a division of 6? Okay, no, it's not. The reason being is that there are 6 struts here, or 6 bolts, and then 12 struts. So maybe if I made this a division of 12 instead of just a division of 4. So what we're at, we were at 40. If it was a division of 12, 24 like times 4 is 48, I believe. I'm doing this not because I need more polys, but because I need my divisions of my math to line up to the number 12 instead of the number 4 in this case, because the bolts, there's 6 bolts and there's 12 struts, and I'm going to use the math of 6 and 12 rather than 4 in this situation, because that's how the math of the wheel is figured out. So let's see, 48, and I'll just double check on my calculator, make sure that 48 divided by 6, 48 divided by 6 is 8. That's perfect. That means I can, I'm going to be able to cut this off in a way where I can do this 6 times and it shall repeat perfectly. Okay, so I've got my placement, should be mostly correct. It does look a little low. So let's just make sure my snap is exactly center. This to width. Now it doesn't look low anymore. This artifacting is great. You know, when you see these 2 things kind of fighting over themselves, it's great because it means that they're on top of each other, and Maya can barely handle which one to render. So that's what you want when you're looking for the high res to low res. You want them to almost feel like they're vibrating off of each other. They have to be in exactly the same space. Okay, so the width is right, thickness feels right, So now I want to think about some other things, like the struts are probably going to be a separate piece of geometry. I can just easily create like a cube for this. Probably going to add like one extra division, but if I create a cube, delete the top and the bottom, this kind of empty or like shoebox thing, and then I move it into a place where it lines up with this other strut. We barely even have to think about how to do this, because I could just use quad draw, and or even this cube is already set up to draw, as long as, let's see, is my move not showing up? Looks like my move, oh, there it is, it's way off. So I don't know why it moved all the way over there. So yeah, this is a bug that happens where your pivot point should reset every time you grab something, and since it's not, I think I am going to have to restart Maya. But the idea would be that if you select your vert, move it into place, it's pretty quick to make it align with the world. But since it's not, the pivot points aren't lining up exactly, it's being a little annoying. So I'm just going to move it into place to get it started. I thought that was going to be easier. And if that is still happening, that pivot point issue, I'm going to have to restart Maya. But here's another thing I'm doing. I'm just kind of rotating it into place. I used object for the rotation orientation and the move rotation orientation instead of world, because that way I can rotate it into space, and then I can move it up and down along its own axis. And this way I'm just kind of scaling it to be somewhat of what this strut is. Putting it in place. And then using quad draw is what I'm going to want eventually to do, but I think, yeah, I think I'm going to need to restart before I use that. What I'll do is move this into place. We'll use a couple of extra edge lines here. I'm going to use multi-cut to add an extra span here. Oh, didn't like it when I did that though. Extra span. Yeah, it's flipping inside out. So quad draw every now and then will go a little haywire on you. What's going on is the math is just broken. I'm going to restart Maya, so let me just save this and restart. There we go. Okay, so yeah, just a quick second and we'll be back up and running, but what was going on there is I could tell when I selected my vert that my pivot point didn't show up exactly on my vert. It should. I should be seeing the gizmo around that vert. Because it wasn't, somehow the last move that I did on moving the pivot point got stuck in Maya's thought process, and so because of that, there was a bug, and I know that bug. It's a common bug in Maya, so I have to restart to get back to where I was. Usually, if you see something weird going on that is not like what everybody else is experiencing, you're not crazy. Maya is just broken, and it's best to restart. Okay, let's go back to where I was. It always takes so long to reload. Nope, is it doing it? No, it's still. Come on, wake up, Maya. That looks like a pretty nice day out. It's cloudy, but it's not raining. This is, yeah, this is the one. Okay. So go back to here, make this, grab the wheel, grab the strut, grab everything that I'm working on. I'm just going to isolate select. And this the model here, it's black. That's weird. That usually means it's inverted. So if I do mesh display reverse, now it's not black. That means the polys, the normals in the polys were inverted. Usually if it goes black and the material isn't black, that's what's going on. I'm not sure why that happened, but it did, and we'll just move on. Seems to be, yeah, I'm going to start with a new box. Something went weird. That's the other thing that happens when there's a bug in Maya, is that it'll be weird, and then it'll like duplicate or something. Something always goes terribly wrong. So it's often just a good idea to restart. Maya hits a memory leak or something, and then it goes haywire. Okay, so I'm just moving this into place by hand because it's the quickest way to do it. And then once the verts are in place, then I could probably play around with quad draw or some other tools to make it a little more accurate. Okay, so if let's see, are we in live? We're not live yet, so I'll select these. Oh, I'm going to grab that cannon in the background. So let's select all this and isolate select. So I'm just looking at the wheel. Then I can select the high-res wheel, and I can make that live. And then what I'll be doing here is moving these verts. This is what I was trying to do before. Moving these verts so that it aligns exactly with the strut. And it just does this pretty automatically when you make something live and then you grab it from the center point to move it. It'll automatically stitch itself to the green live object. Sometimes I do find that the moving is a little awkward as far as sometimes it acts a little funny as far as how it moves. But when you're using quad draw, some reason it doesn't. So if your move tool is acting funny when you're moving on a live object, sometimes I find if you go into quad draw and you just select those verts, it moves it almost seamlessly. It's perfect. So quad draw is wonderful for that as well, and I found that to be rather annoying that the move tool doesn't exactly work, but quad draw works fine. Okay, so I got it into place, and you can see there's an extra little part up here that I left out. That's because it gets thinner, and I wanted to extrude that up and shrink it down a little bit so that we had that tapering up here. So it got a little funky because I went too far with the extrude, and quad draw got funky there. But if I just do this, then quad draw, move these around, we should be good. Basically, I'm trying to get it right up to the edge. I don't want to go past the edge. I just want right up to the edge, and I want that silhouette to look good. Okay, so you can see that there's a little bit of a difference in the shape of the strut here because we had a just cube instead of a instead of this more rounded strut, and I think it would be a good idea to add just a little more polys to this cube. So hold on, I'm just trying to delete this one little geometry. I forget what deletes here. Delete dots. Control Shift left mouse button. Bonk. There we go. Okay. So yeah, what I wanted to do was add one more edge span to either edge here, so that we weren't totally. And when we do a poly smooth, that's going to really help out. And I can show you again. If we isolate this thing on its own, I'll delete these top polys. We don't need those. Those are hidden. So anytime a polygon's hidden in the low res, we might as well just delete it. We want to keep things optimized. But what I wanted to do was separate this out and say, if it didn't have these extra edge spans on either side, then what will it look like when we do a mesh display soften edge? We do that, we get that real dark, ugly edge whenever we're looking away from the light, and that's a problem. That's not what reality looks like. So I will add these extra edge spans here, here, and of course, since I deleted the poly, it's no longer a ring, but add those extra edge spans. Now when we do a mesh display soften edge, it looks great. So let's hide the snap layer, but that is the mesh display soften edge. It looks pretty good. There's still a little bit of a dark line. It's really hard to go, you know, like over a 90-degree turn. I think honestly I could just push it closer to the edge and it would look fine. A little closer. And then when I do here, mesh display, soften edge, that was harden edge, mesh display, soften edge, that looks pretty good. So even though it's very, very low res, that's going to really match the strut. So that's the strut's good. We'll bring up the snap layer again. What else do we need to deal with? Well, we do need to figure out how to make this feel right, but most importantly, we've got to figure out how to add this little extra bolt here. And I do want that stitched in. So instead of making this 6 times, I'm just going to do 1. And how do we do that? We figure out where the section that we want to repeat is. That would be here, because you can see it's in the center of these 2 clamps. So that looks like the place that I want to repeat. So I'll select everything else, delete it. Now this is a ring that was already set up to be in the right access point. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze the transformations before I go any further. This is actually very helpful. If I freeze my movement and my scale transformations or rotations, now if whatever happens, I can always go back to 0, and that's exactly where I should be. That's great. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to freeze it on this one as well, because I don't want to accidentally move it later. And I'm pretty sure if I turn on Canon high res, yeah, that all lines up great. Okay, so I've got this one piece. We've got the wheel snap. Oh, it's live. That's why I can't select it. We've got this one piece. We've got the wheel and the strut. I've got this one piece that I'm now going to duplicate 6 times in a rotation. I can do it with first by an instance, so I can watch it all at once. Rotate on, what value am I rotating on? It's the X value. So rotate X is X, Y, Z. So X, I'm going to rotate, I guess, 6 divided by 360 for the math of a circle. So for the degrees of a circle. So let's look at the calculator again. So 360 divided by 6. That's going to be 60. So I'm going to rotate 60 degrees, and then I'm going to duplicate it 5 times because I already have 1. So let's try that out. So we've got 6 other versions. I will have to delete them in a second because they're instances, but while I'm doing this, I just want to see it all at once. And then now I need to create the extra polygons where that buckle is. So let's make sure this part is live. And then we will I'll make this snap a kind of a transparent. And then what I'll do is I'll select this object. I'm going to start manipulating the geometry here so that it matches this this buckle. So I'll grab a multi-cut and just drag an extra line here, an extra line here and here. And what I'm doing is I'm just setting up a place for which there to be kind of an extrusion out here. And then what's really helpful is if all of these are duplicated exactly the same, I can tell where my edge needs to be on this side. So this is another object on this side. It's another object, and if you notice, that worked here, but if I go up to this one, I'm missing the edge here. So let's do it again. We'll do, I want to extrude that buckle out, so I don't need an extra edge here, but I do need one here. And here, and here, and this gives me the whole shape. And this one extra edge, I'm going to be able to kind of connect them here. Let's see, what the hell is this one here to here, and then there. So they don't match up because, or they're not stitched together here. But what I can do is I can put it in place. I can put that one line in place, and then what I'll do is I'll snap this edge by holding down V, which turns off and turn off the make live. I'm snapping that edge so that these are aligned perfectly. So when I duplicate them all around all these verts should snap together. Okay. And now I can select both of these, and I can do a little extrude. Just extrude it up. I could, yeah, let's go back to making this object live, because it's not live now. I'm not getting the perfect shrink wrap. But if I make the object live, the snap object live, and then I can select these verts and move them around. If you notice, I extruded up, and I used two different polygons to extrude up. And what happened there was that there's probably going to be a polygon in between. So if we turn off snap, there's a polygon in between these two. Maybe not the best way. It probably would have been better if I overlapped that edge just a little bit. But this is the way I did it, and we'll just make sure that the interior edges of these two spots are deleted. And this is where it's helpful that they're instances, because I can see these both lining up together, and even though it's the same object, I'm affecting two different sides of it at the same time, and that ends up being really helpful for creating this kind of geometric unique object. Okay, so it should still be live. I'm going to go to quad draw just because things move a little better in quad draw, and I'm just going to move my verts into the right space on both sides. Trying to match that silhouette. Remember, we're thinking about this like it's shrink wrapped. As if there's just plastic wrap going over the entire high res. You can see here I did this wrong. These two are not necessarily matching this angle at all. So let's pull this forward. These forward. Just make sure that all of these look like it's matching what should be kind of the silhouette. In this situation, I don't really have the extra polys to really get it perfect. And what you want to do if you have a little bit of an issue in maybe the shape doesn't quite match your low-res geometry, it's okay. What you can do is just kind of soften these enough so that when the normal's baked down, it's not going over geometry that's too crunchy or too complicated. If you soften it just a little bit, what happens is that it'll bake to a clean flat poly instead of a chunky faceted poly. So you want to keep these the low res simple. You don't want to get too up and down. If my polygons were kind of going up and down a lot, the low res wouldn't look good, even though it's trying to match the high res exactly. You want to soften some of these edges out because it ends up looking better in the long run. That softened silhouette, like it's shrink wrapped, makes the normals bake cleaner. Okay, so now that I've done most of the quad draw stuff, I'm just kind of moving a few things around to make sure that the final object doesn't look terribly broken. I've turned off Make Live. I'm just trying to kind of see in which way that I could get this low res object to look as good as possible without adding any extra geometry. I don't think I want extra geometry on this level. It's very small. It's off in the distance. So it's not like that needs a whole lot. But why don't we select it and see what happens when you do mesh display soften edge, see what issues we start to see when that happens. You can see the major issue is this edge here. These bigger edges, those are a problem. So we do want to make sure that we put some extra edges here and here, and then we're probably going to want to put one here. And the back, maybe you don't see the back as much, but we'll just make sure that it's there anyway. And because the way that I put this geometry together, it is a little confused in this one spot, so I'll do one extra edge here. And then if I grab this other model, I can do the same thing. One extra edge here. And if they are not actually stitched together, you just need to make sure they're snapped together. And that should do it. Okay, so now I'll do the mesh display soften edge again. And then, so most things are okay, but that interior, yeah, actually doesn't look too bad. So this is good. I know it gets a little weird here. Sometimes you can add an extra edge in there, but I think when the final bake is in, the normals are gonna make that look pretty decent, because at the end of the day, this is the direction we're going to be facing most of the time. That's how you'll see it most of the time. If it looks good from this direction, we're doing pretty well. So I think that is going to do it for this geometry that I know has been kind of uniquely complicated. But what I can do here now, I'm just delete the history. I'm going to do a quick UV, not to do anything final, but because it'd be easier to handle UVing these polys, breaking them up into separate shells, and then when we go back to full UV, I'm going to do one more pass. But when you're dealing with something that you're going to repeat a lot, it's always good to kind of throw in some quick UV on there that you will end up manipulating later. So if I bring up the UV editor, I'm going to want to select this whole interior edge. Oh, and it looks like right there I could kind of add an extra spot. That's what's giving me the most artifacts anyway. So right there, and then here. Because these aren't stitched together, I need to make sure that they're snapped together. There we go. Okay, so yeah, we'll do a mesh display soften edge. It looks a lot better. This is the back. There's a little bit of darkness, but since it's the back, I'm not as worried about. I think it's actually going to turn out fine. Anyway, we've got one that looks, this one piece looks good. I think I'm happy with the model itself, so I'll delete all the instances because instances you can't combine together. You can only combine separate objects. And then I'll delete the instances. Now we're going to go in here and just do a really quick UV. Nothing actual fancy. I'm not going to even unfold anything. I'm just going to separate out shells that I want the different UVs to be separated out by. So this outer edge I want to be a shell. So instead of doing anything like, you know, you can easily do a cylindrical UV and stuff like that, I'm just going to quickly do a planar UV to just create it as a shell. Grab the other edges, do a planar UV as well. And all this is doing is just making sure that I have a selection set for when I need it later. So when I stitch all this together, When I open up the UV texture editor, you will see these, and then if I need to grab the polys, I'll just select them. It makes a really easy way to select models, polys, if you have kind of UV'd their shells out already. Okay, so this thing's ready to go. It's going to be duplicated 6 times at 60 degrees rotation value each time, and I can do that using the duplicate special, and then I'm going to change it from instance to a copy, and I'll make it group under the world. Rotate it 60 degrees, number of copies 5 times. With duplicate special, and this is an object again, not an instance. All of these objects it shouldn't move here. Oh, interesting. Yeah, the translation. Oh wait, hold on. Why is the translation moving? That's weird. Somehow the translation's moving it, but it didn't. It actually, it's this one here. I don't know what that's about. Well, they all seem to be in the same spot, so that is what I wanted anyway. So if we select them all, we're going to mesh combine. They'll all be one piece. We're not done yet. We still need to stitch them together because they're separated. So what I'll do is whenever I'm stitching multiple pieces together, we're going to do a, I'm going to show the poly count because it helps me make sure I am welding the vertices. So we'll do, what is it, heads up display, poly count, and then, come on, display, heads up display, poly count. It should be here, it's not there. Display, heads up display, poly count. Okay, so it's not showing up, I'm not sure why. Yeah, there's usually a little HUD up here. I don't know, 2020 Maya is not being as nice about showing it. Interesting. Polygons, yeah, weird. Okay, so usually we do see little numbers up here. I don't know why that's happening. I think my preferences need to be deleted in Maya. But what I can do is I can select all my verts, do a mesh, edit mesh, merge. I'm going to merge on a very low threshold. And then I will come back to my model and grab an area in which did have a seam, and just double check to make sure that seam is stitched together on each edge. As long as everything was instance and the math was right, we should have these all stitched together. If they're not, you will have some small problems. But this should all be stitched together. One way you can kind of tell is if you double click on an edge loop. If it goes all the way around, they're all stitched together. Okay, so that actually is all I need to do for the wheel. The strut, I still need to mess with that a little bit. I'm just going to UV it, because remember, if we're duplicating it 12 times, it's going to be a lot easier if I've kind of already pre-UV'd this one. This one's going to be real simple because it's got no bottom polygon or top polygon. So what I can do is a cool trick of just doing a mesh, a UV planar map. It's going to project it just flat, simply. And then if I go into my UV editor, go into tools, show UV toolkit, it's going to give me all my tools. This is a flat projected all the way through. I want to unfold it so that it's accurate and the checkerboard doesn't look all skewed here. But I need to find a seam, and with these struts, it's going to be easiest if I have as few seams as possible. So I'm just going to grab the very, very back edge, just one, and I will go to cut and sew, and I'll make sure I grab the whole edge, because if you notice, there's an extra little slice there that I'm missing. But if I grab that whole edge and I do cut, then I can select the UVs and do an unfold. and it should pretty nicely unfold it out, although it does look oddly like the rotation values are acting a little funny there. It shouldn't rotate like a curve like that. Basically, it should just look like this, where it's all kind of flattened to one thing. But here's an easier way to maybe get this started is I'll do a UV projection, a cylindrical projection. I'm going to rotate that cylindrical projection into the right place for this strut. This seems to be a better start, and so I'll start with this, and then when I do unfold, does it give me the same thing? Yeah, it kind of gives me the same thing. But what if this should be accurate on the bottom. This looks pretty clean and accurate. I'll select the top and do an unfold to that. Maybe just along the V, along the U, I guess. Oh, it's not. That's too bad. But basically, I'm just trying to kind of relax these out. I do remember that these tools have never really totally worked, so sometimes I use the modify unfold, go to the option box there, and the legacy unfold. This is like the 10-year-old UV unfold, but it still works with the unfold constraints that I want to constrain the vertical or constrain the horizontal. But this does seem to work better for some reason. I don't know why the new unfold kind of sucks sometimes, but this works better. So what I'm going to do is this is perfect now. The UV should be just right. There shouldn't be any stretching, and there's only one seam. That looks great. I'm going to move it off to the side because I know later I'm going to put everything in the 0 to 1 space, and right now this one piece is just in the way. So I move it off to the side. It's UV'd. I can move it back in when everybody's happy with everything. But now I need, 12 more struts. And so what I'll do is I will make sure the pivot point of this is moved and snapped to kind of the center star of this axle cylinder. So I'll hit D. We can move the pivot point. I'm going to hold down V. We have no live surface right now, so this will work. V-snap doesn't work if you have a live surface. It doesn't know how to handle it. But if I hold down V and I snap to the star in the center here, it also doesn't like to snap if it's in the transparent mode, so I got to go back to R. Go down snap, and it will snap to the center. Remember, it has to be on R or nothing in the layer for the snap to work. But now that I'm snapped on that center star for the axle, I can, let's see, I'm going to do modify, freeze transformations, delete history, and then I'm going to duplicate this 11 times and by probably 30 degrees, because when it comes to 360 divided by 12, it's going to be 30 degrees. And this is a wonderful magic number. And here we go. Okay, so I will go to edit, duplicate special, duplicate 11 other copies on the rotation value of 30 on the X. There we go. And if we turn off our snap layer, we're pretty damn close. So what I like to do, turn off wireframe and just make sure that everything looks good. Everything looks great. Now I just need to make a axle here. And this does not have to be nearly as complicated as this axle, but I do want to get in the silhouette, which if you look at this one, that one's pretty complicated. Let's do a 90-degree turn here. I'm going to snap it to the star in the center. Make sure that we are aligned with the rotation values. I'll shrink it down. And then you want to place it in the same space. At some point, I might do a quadra on this, but honestly, since it's geometric, it's going to just be better if I don't. It's almost like a quadra will ruin any perfect geometry, because quadras trying to align it to the high res. The high res is, yeah, it's in a geometrically perfect space, but we have a different number of polys on this axle than in the high res, and it's going to get a little confused. So that's why geometrically perfect things aligned end up just working a little faster than quad draw, just like the Canon. Okay, so what I need to do here is just double check to make sure I have enough spans going around this smaller cylinder. Turn off wireframe unshaded, select the cylinder. We've got 20. Okay, 20 is pretty good. What if it was, so it should be a division of 12 because of the alignment with these struts. It's going to look a little better if it is. So we've got 12, that's pretty low. Let's do 24. 24 looks pretty good. So that's what I would suggest doing there. That's, I mean, it's a little higher than you need to be, but what happens is that we align each polygon exactly with a strut. That's going to make the normals look a lot better. All right, bring back the snap layer. I'm just going to grab the axle, low res, and then the wheel, and just look at this together. We'll turn on the transparency. And now I'm going to just extrude this. Go back to my toolkit. We'll do an extrude. And I really am just going to try to match the silhouette as closely as possible. It's this little edge with the little panel line in there. I can bypass that. I don't need to worry about that kind of detail in the silhouette. But maybe I do need it to buckle out a little bit because it does get a little wide here. I don't need it to go in. That's a little too much information. And we've got this little bracket at the end. And that one's going to be very important that it has thickness, because even though it's very small, the bracket is, it does have physical thickness, which is, it needs to be written. So I'm just going to extrude it out with that thickness, align it to the bracket, and then that bolt in the center, we can just say is it's going to be projected into this low-res kind of flat plane, and that should look great. Okay, so that's the axle on that side. We'll get the other side. Just going to align the silhouette. Some minor things I will forego in the silhouette because remember, it's like shrink wrapping. You don't want all the detail. You just want the simple detail. You want exactly the amount of polys that you need instead of how many you're starting with the proxy or with the high res. So this is ultimately faster. I highly recommend doing everything this way instead of taking a high res model and trying to reduce it. It just takes way too long and what you wanted. But here we've got the axle. I'm just going to do mesh display soften edge. This soften edge just tells me what it will look like. And even though there is a little bit of darkness there, I believe that when we look at it from the full scale, that darkness is going to be so inconsequential that I can just leave it alone. Okay, so that looks great. The axle looks good. The wheel looks good. The cannon looks good. And the cannon just needs to be mirrored. We'll do that right now. Just mirroring it, then I modify freeze transformations, although I don't know if that's even a necessary step anymore. They kind of fix that so that when I select both and combine, they should have the same poly normal direction. It used to be that if you duplicated, inverted a model, and combined two models, one half of it, that would be this half, would be reversed, and it would look like this, where it's black. So if you find yourself with half of your model being black, then what you need to do is select those black polys and say reverse. And that just brings it back to normal. Okay, so I've got two sides, but remember, I never stitched the two sides together. They are separated. So I will select all of my verts and do a mesh, edit mesh, merge at a low threshold. We hit merge, and then I'm just going to go around and double check that center point, make sure that there is no longer a seam in there. So that looks pretty good. And if you notice, there will be just a hard edge in the polys going down the center. So even though I smoothed the polys before with the smooth the normals before, I still need to smooth them again because I don't want to see that seam going down the center. I usually never want to see seams, especially right up front. So what I like to do is make sure that the top of the cannon is fully unique. And then we can mesh display, soften edge, and there should be no seam on the top of the cannon in the normals at all. Okay, so the last part is the chassis, a little bit of complexity there, and we'll bring that up, which is, let's see, let's go back to the Canon high res. The chassis, it's just got a unique shape, but ultimately it's pretty simple. What I can do is I can select all the objects that I want to snap to, and I'm going to duplicate them. I'm going to remove them from the high-res layer, the high-res group, and then we'll add them to the snap layer. And this can be just its own deal, the snap layer. And then now I've got this whole thing, the whole chassis set up. I want to combine certain things that will ultimately be combined, like this ridge of metal and the wooden chassis should really be combined. So I'm going to combine them, and that's going to make it easier to use quad draw. The other thing that's important with quad draw is usually you need your high res and your low res, transformations to be frozen down to 0 and the scales to be at 1. Otherwise, quad draw acts a little funny. Anyway, I could start with a box or something, but this is going to be fun to just do this all with quad draw, and this is how we would do it if it's like an organic monster or anything. So let's just bring up the toolkit. We'll turn this object live, and then we'll go right into quad draw. I don't know why it's... Can I delete that? What is it? Delete dots, Control Shift, middle. Oh, no, that one's just floating around. Anyway, it's gone now. So let's do this. I'm just going to make half of it because I can duplicate it, so we can even start from the center. I'll turn wireframe mode shading on so I can see where the center is. And then I can just start creating some polys. Make 4, creates a poly. Holding down Shift will create the poly. Then I can keep going here. I can use my tab and middle mouse, does an extrude, does kind of speed some things up, but then mostly it's just about moving these verts around. And then if I need an extra poly here, just add an extra vert. Wants to create a quad here, so we can add one extra vert here. That created a, that's a problem. Actually, I shouldn't do it that way. I should delete. This one should just go to here. Let's delete this guy. Okay, so just getting it into place. I can even, let's go back to snap and turning this into a transparent object. I think because I combined this thing, it's not my snap layer. So I'm going to select it, add it to my snap layer, and then make it live again. Okay, so this will help because I can turn it on and off now. I got this moving into place. Let's go back to quad draw. And really what I wanted was one extra strut here. It went a little haywire because it's trying to go all the way down. I'll just move it back to where it needs to be. That's kind of the amount of polygons I need for that curve, not too much. Let's get down here, and I can start, if these are cleanly set up, I can use not relax, holding down tab and extruding out this whole edge loop here. I can also do that up here. And gets it started. It was a little messy, but it's a good start. And then just kind of move some of these into place. Sometimes what I'll also do is scale them down so that they are flat, because it's going to look a little better if they're flat rather than going back and forth stuff. Okay, so that looks all right. Let's hide that for a second. I'm thinking in quad draw, I want one edge here, and let's get rid of this thing. one edge here, and that creates a good, nice polygon, and one edge is probably going to be here. And then let's turn the thing back on, see what it looks like. Yeah, it's about right, a little lower. These are matching, trying to keep it clean. And then we do need the bottom here. This is an area in which I could continue these edge lines all the way down, but what I'm going to do is combine some of these to make them a little more optimized. So I could even do something like that, because I don't need a whole lot of polys on the bottom. But now I can try to do a drag, but it drags this whole edge loop. I don't want to do that, so maybe I just click to create a new vert, hold down Shift to create a new poly, click to create a vert, new poly, and then now I could try dragging this whole edge loop down. It ends up working out pretty well. There's some movements and some changes that I'll do. Some things aren't lining up exactly, and remember, you always have to look at it at the end on its own to make sure it looks good on its own. But here, this way, I can kind of quickly get through a lot of complicated shape stuff just by using the quad draws tools as quickly as possible. So here, there's this curve in the axle, this kind of organic curve. I'm missing all of that down here, so I should probably add an extra edge here, and an extra edge here, and then align my verts so that that looks right. Okay, so that looks good. Now I'm just going to move some edges around to clean them up. It doesn't want to grab that because it thinks it's hiding. It's behind something. Sometimes you got to rotate your camera around to get to the right space to see the in quad draw, so that you're not kind of working behind an object. Even if it's the high-res object, it thinks that you want to work behind it. Anyway, a couple of cleanup things here, just to align this more with the ridge around the outside. And then I think that's looking pretty good. I will add one extra edge. No, I don't need that, actually. That'll be great and normal. I want to make sure my silhouette, it's catching the very edges of my silhouette. That's really important. Cool. So that looks mostly okay. You know, there's a little bit that we can kind of forego with this, as far as it doesn't need to be quite as curved as the high res. Just want to make sure we get pretty close. Bring this down. And it just feels like I could use one more edge there, otherwise it's not going to match. And you can always optimize some of these things, especially the interior one's going to be underneath the cannon, but it should be fine. It's not too many polys. Okay, so now I need to kind of figure out how to create this more complex geometry term. This perpendicular area here, so why don't yeah, it does look like I need one edge here that goes around the ridge of the metal, and that would help keep this whole thing looking pretty clean if I added this one extra ridge here. Grab that. I think in quad draw there's a way you can kind of scoot edges. Drag to relax points, drag to extend border. Let's see. Drag to tweak components is the middle mouse. So this kind of does an edge loop, but it's only grabbing where an edge. I wonder if I can grab the whole edge loop. Drag to extend. So let's try tab, and no, that tab wants to extrude. There is a place somewhere where to drag an edge loop. It might even be in the mesh tools. Offset edge loop, I believe it is, but that should I guess it's just splitting an edge. Interesting. Okay, let's turn off this so it's a little easier to read. Is it mesh tools, offset edge loop? I think that is just adding more edges. That's not what I want. So you can do it by hand. I just wanted a way that was a little faster to align my edges, just scoot them over just a little bit. But yeah, you can do it by hand. And mainly I wanted this whole thing to align with the metallic ridge that goes around it. Anyway, that one looks all right. Somehow I got an extra edge here, and I don't want that. So I'll just double click on it and delete it. The rest looks good. Yeah, and then now I need this corner here to be worked out, and we'll use quad draw for that. Got here, so we'll do a extrovert. Let's make this visible. So yeah, you got extrovert, and then we can kind of bring this down. It doesn't need to be quite that high, and then this into place. This one here, and then we've got the bottom is already created, so we should be. Oh, let's see. All this together, and I should be able to create a quad draw here. Wants to a little far on its intentions. So why don't I use, in this situation, I'm going to use a pen poly to append these stitches together, because sometimes quad draw is a little funky. Pen poly always seems to do it the old-fashioned way. There we go. And then I'll append the polys here, not because I want this to be blocked off, but because I am going to want to extrude this. Yeah, all that looks good. Yeah, I'm going to extrude this, and I want to pull in those extra ridges. That's fine. So we'll extrude these out, and when I use extrude, and I do have a live model, it does stitch to them. Well, it does if I'm in quad draw, but apparently not. Without quad draw. So let's try that again. Got the object selected. We'll do quad draw, hit extrude. And it's just a little funky with quad draw. Okay, so I'm going to extrude that out again. Select these polys. I'm just going to extrude it out once, so I've got something to start with. And frankly, it ends up working really well if I extrude it all the way out to wherever it needs to go, and then move it into place. Although it looks like moving it will slide it, but extruding it does not adhere it to the quad draw system, so that's fine. I can do this. We're seeing it here. I'm going to do extrude, pull it out, and then I'm going to move it down. So it's kind of in the same place. And then here's what's happened when I go into the move mode and I try to slide it, it automatically kind of stitches it all in. I'll go a little further. There we go. I'm going to use scale to kind of flatten it out, although because of the quad draw stuff, it's acting a little funny. This is about where I want it to be, and then now I just have to kind of move these verts around so they're not broken. It doesn't let you grab verts unless they are not hidden by the high res. It somehow thinks that you care about the high res back face culling, but that's not always really of value. But it does, yeah, it always wants to hide your whatever you're trying to grab. So you have to think about the high res as being in the way sometimes. Okay, so that kind of did what I want. I'm going to turn off live for a second so I can really make sure that this doesn't get all skewed. I use live to get everything in the right place, but at the end of the day, I'm always just kind of going with what looks right. If it doesn't look right, it's broken. It doesn't matter if you use live or not. If it doesn't look right, it's broken. And one thing that is really beneficial is to just try to align things that are in the same plane to be flat. You don't want things all skewy like this one is. If things are as clean and as flat as possible, it's going to really help with your the final. And then, yes, these look a lot better now that they've been kind of cleaned up. And then one thing is, because this is mirrored in the center here, we absolutely need to make sure that it's snapped to grid center. So what I'll do is make sure that the move snap settings, retain component spacing is off. I'll grab an edge area, hold down X, and snap it to the center, yeah, it looks like Maya's doing that tricky thing where everything that I click is the opposite. I don't know why it's doing that, but I can flatten this out and then snap it to the center. So flattening it out just by scaling it is one way to flatten things out, and then if I snap it to the center, we should be good. I'll double check it at the end to make sure that when we stitch it together, we're not stitching two broken seams together, but that should be good for now. We'll extrude this one edge out here. Then I do want to add one more extrude for the very end, because the polys will look better if there's an edge there. Okay, so now I want to see what this looks like without the high res and with smooth normals and without any wireframe on it. So turn it off, hit the mesh display soften edge. Now we will see where any major issues are that we need to fix. Looks like I do need an extra edge on the interior wall here. That should be pretty easy. Oops, right here. I don't want it to go all the way around, so maybe I do this. This one, I'll just drag it up. Kind of getting a spiral, which is no good. Spirals end up being pretty bad, but I have an idea of how to fix that. Yeah, just want to bring this up, this edge span up. Use the tolerance. If I'm too far away and don't get it just right. And I'm going to bring it to here, and then we're going to kind of change places here. That should work. I'm not really too worried about this aligning exactly. It's more of an edge span to help the normals look better. So mesh display soften edge. That looks better than it was. This front area looks awful, so I will put an extra edge in the front. Bottom does need an edge. If you notice, it does. If I try to add an edge, it doesn't go all the way around if there's a triangle. And this one spot is an area that I should clean this up, because that doesn't look right at all. So let's, I'm going to delete all this. I'm going to do a multi-cut to the center here, and then these can still be triangles. I don't need them to be anything more than that, but we'll do a mesh display soften edge. That looks great. That is what I want. The only issue is right here, and because that's in the interior, it's not really that big of a deal. But if we really wanted to do something, we could probably carry this edge over. So at this point, I'm not really thinking about quad draw. I'm just thinking about what the normals look like. That's all I really care about. Quad draw, I made sure everything was on top of each itself. It was in the right place. We're good. And then once I get the normals to look right, and I'm looking at it by itself, which that looks pretty good. That's going to work out well. I'm always going to double check what it looks like to the high res. Make sure that I'm not drastically off. Make sure that the silhouette is exactly the same. Okay, so did that. We've got that all worked out, and then everything else should be baked into the normals as far as any other issues, any other details. So that looks great. We're good to go. I just need to UV this part. So I think I'm going to there's one more thing here. It's the bracket. I didn't create that. but that could be a separate piece of an object, and I'm just going to skip that and just kind of UV these three things together and show you how to put them all together. And then we will do a quick little bake in Substance Painter, make sure that everything lines up. So let's see, my snap layer. So I'm missing my high-res Canon. I just want to make sure my Canon high-res is in the same place. And yeah, it looks like at some point the Canon high-res moved or my low-res moved. That's really frustrating. I just need to make sure that it is always in the same place. So before I ever do anything in the low-res step, I just always double-check to make sure that my high-res and my low-res are sitting directly on top of each other. And 99% of the time when students are having an issue with their normals, it's because they're just not sitting on top of each other. Somehow they moved at some point. It happens. It happens a lot. Okay, so the wheel has been UV'd, the Canon has not, this axle has not. Since the wheel's already been UV'd, I will quickly create a UV for this axle. I'll just do a cylindrical UV, but ignore the caps. So let's grab everything that isn't on the ends. So what is it? UV, cylindrical. You get this cylinder, and if we were to turn on the checkerboards, you notice that's this button here in the UV texture editor. You notice we're not in the right space. Everything's skewing. So what I do is I click on the little T at the bottom of the UV gizmo, and then that T gives the option to rotate or move or scale. And then I'll click the rotation, and that's going to give me another option to rotate again. So if I rotate here, I can see in the rotation values, we're moving something over here. We'll do -90, so we're geometrically perfect. And then I want to rotate the gizmo so that the seam is in the right space. And you should be able to see the seams if you have your UV texture editor open. You should be able to see the seams while you're rotating the cylinder around, and this is very helpful. So you see that seam, I just want to put it on the bottom. It's going to work the best. And then I've got the caps of this object. So what I usually do when I do a UV is I'll planar project the UV, and then I'll move it off to the side, and then I'll select the other parts that haven't, or planar or cylindrical project a UV, move it off to the side, and then I'll select the parts that haven't been UV'd yet and figure out what still needs to be separated out as different shells. This cap, this kind of thing here, this hubcap, it's got this front could all be one UV, but the back, because of that 90-degree turn, it's going to have a hell of a time UVing that. So I'm going to separate the back here from the front. And here I can just do a planar projection UV, and I'm just going to try to do it from the right side, from the Z. No, I want to do it from the X. The X would be better. Okay, so we'll do planar projection from the X value, and that gives us that flat circle. That's pretty cool. But then we have, if you look at the checkerboards, you're still stretching on the edges of that circle. So what I'm going to do is select it and just do an unfold. In this case, I'm not terribly worried about the fidelity of that edge, so an unfold does a pretty good job here. Of course, my unfold, right as I say that, it's not working, but this unfold is acting a little funny, so I might go back into my modify tab in the UV editor, go to the legacy unfold, and then sometimes this works better than the new one. Sometimes the new one works better than the old one. You just got to play around. Anyway, I turn on my checkerboards. I'm not seeing any stretching on that hubcap. That's awesome. The other two caps do need UVs as well. So I'll do the same thing where I do planar projection from the X. It's going to mostly do everything just right, but the only issue is that things are inverted. They're flipped, and that's not necessarily always an issue. But in this case, I just like to keep things consistent. So I'm going to rotate on the Y -90 instead of 90, and we should have these all flipped. The other way you can flip them, if you do find that your things are flipped, is under the transform, there is, or the tools in the transform in the UV toolkit, there is a flip here. And if you find your numbers are backwards, just flip it so that they're correct, and then you're good to go. These are two different UV shells that are sitting directly on top of each other. That's a problem. So I do need to separate them out. There's a quick way to select UV shells. You just go to select components, UV shell, and then you can click on one, move them away from each other. So that way, at least they're separate. You can deal with it later. The UVs on this one, as long as we're not too stretched or squished, it looks ultimately okay. Unfolding, sometimes can help. I find that with cylinders, you don't want to unfold just in a way where it does this, where it curves everything. That's going to create all kinds of issues for you later. It's a cylinder. We should keep it in a cylindrical map. But what I do is I use the legacy unfold. I constrain on the vertical, and then I constrain on the horizontal. And basically, what happens is that you have a cylindrical unfold. It is pretty mathematically correct, but it is also very clean. And if I look at these checkers, the checkers go around pretty clearly. Even though there's a seam down the center, they're still lining up, and that's really important. That's going to be very useful later on if I ever have to clean up those normals. So anyway, I'm not worried about sizing anything right now, but everything should be the same textile density. There is a trick we do with the UV toolkit. There is a trick, and it's what is it? It's under the tools, and what is it? The density will help us get all of our textile density exactly the same. Say if I want all of the parts of the axle to be the same textile density, I'll select the axle and say get, and that's going to get me the textile density of the axle, and then I'll select the other ones and I'll say set, and it should set everything at the same textile density. That means all of these checkers should be the same. That's very important for texturing, and I highly recommend looking at the checkers to make sure that they are all lining up mostly the same. They can be a little variation of size, but you really want them to mostly be the same. That's called textile density. It ends up being very important in games because when you lower resolution, it lowers it completely. It just looks like I fucked up this one edge here. And so, yeah, if you lower resolution, you lower it completely, which ends up being very problematic. So if you have different resolutions at different points in your model, so you want to keep all of your resolution ultimately exactly in the same space, the same textile density. A little skewed. I'm just making sure we are all snapped correctly. Good to go. Here we are. Delete history, and yeah, that looks great. This whole model is really ready to go. Now I'm just going to start UVing everything. I've already kind of UV'd the parts of the wheel and the axle. Now we can UV the cannon. Let's do that. That's going to be a very important one. We want to separate out the different shells that are in the cannon to different pieces. So what I like to do is just start real simple. I start with a simple planar projection. Are you waking up, Kat? I start with a simple planar projection, and then that gives me one shell. And this is totally broken, totally useless, but what it just keeps everything organized. So now I'm going to, hey, how you doing? So now I'm going to separate the parts that need separation. The interior of the cannon absolutely needs to be separate from the rest of the cannon. It just makes no sense if they were all together. So I'll select that. We'll do just a quick planar projection for that. Just going down the Z, this kind of creates something that I'm probably going to have to do a cylindrical map for that actually, but it does. It could be done this way, but I think cylindrical map's going to look better. Hey, Kat, what's up? Okay, so I'm going to rotate my cylindrical map so that it aligns with the cylinder. the cylindrical map gizmo. Let's see, where'd it go? Let's do it again. The cylindrical, and then if you click the T, brings up the rotation option. You can then rotate it. You see that rotation value, do -90, and then now that interior of the cannon is mostly correct, except for that back wall. That's a cap, and cylinders don't work well with caps. You can see this one's totally screwed. I didn't say cat, I said cap. But the anytime there's a cap, you can see that one's totally skewed, and an issue. You can see if we looked at it, it would be squished. So I'm going to grab that cap and just do a simple planar projection. Anytime you have a cylinder, you want to project or to cut the caps off. It just doesn't work if you leave the caps on. There. Okay, got this piece and this piece. What I like to do is keep the cannon part all in one part that I haven't UV'd yet, and then all the parts that I have UV'd, I just move it off to the side. Looks like I accidentally grabbed this cap back here, which frankly that's what I wanted to do. Although there's some extra edges there. So let's go back a couple of steps, and I'll just deselect that. So mesh display, or is it UV planar projection at the Z? Good to go. Okay, and then whatever this is, that was that's something I'm gonna have to fix later. This whole scene at the very end, that's gonna be very problematic to do as a cylinder or anything. So what I do, there's a real cool trick. You just do a UV planar projection. It's flattened out. You know, definitely gonna be skewed. But what I can do, I'll move this over so I can see it, and then we'll do an unfold. Since my legacy seems to be the only thing that's working for me, I'm going to do an unfold, but unfolds don't really work with spheres. They just kind of skew them around more. There's still a lot of issues. So what I'll do, make sure I don't have anything else left again. What I'll do is I will cut a seam in it, because it still needs a little bit of a seam. It doesn't need to go all the way back as a seam, but it needs a little bit of seam, this little here at the back. And if I cut a seam, I'm going to use my UV toolkit to cut a seam. Under cut, you see cut. And then, so yeah, that should be a seam there. And then now if I do an unfold with these UVs, it ends up working a little better. It didn't look good there. Maybe in this case, I'm going to try using the new unfold. Yeah, a little funky there. Let's see, unfold. Yeah, I don't like it when you can see the seam crossing through. It's overlapping poly is a major issue. So maybe the unfold tool. Let's see, optimize. No, none of that works. Okay, so this usually works. I have a feeling that it might need history deleted. Transformation is frozen. That helps too. But let's see, history deleted. Let's try it now. Sometimes it gets mad if you have too much information in your model. Still having an issue. Let's see, no pin, no constraint, pin unselected. Okay, this is what I want. It's still a little funky there. I don't know why. It doesn't seem to be a seam or anything, but it is acting a little funky. Yeah. Okay, so I did that. That looked better. I'm not sure why it's having so much trouble with it. It's usually better at this, but it does look better now. This is kind of what I want it to look like. These spheres at the end, they kind of need their own style of UV unfold. And in this case, it's a little tricky, but it seemed to work out. Okay, so those are the fringe points. Now let's work on the main part of the cannon. For that, I do want to separate out these two axles, and so we'll just make sure that I select the axle cylinders and nothing else but the axle cylinders. And I'm just going to create a planar projection just to move them out of the way. And then now should be everything in here is the main fuselage, and I can do a cylindrical map on it. But again, because of caps, I need to switch it up a little bit. So I'm going to do a planetary projection of the cap here, and that'll be the final way that we look at this cap. So just select it. I'm selecting this. That's probably where I want the seam to start, maybe going up one. And we'll do UV planetary projection from the Z. That looks good. Move that off to the side. And then same with the back area here. This one, we want to select this back area, do a planetary projection here as well. So that looks good, although if you notice, the checkers, the numbers are inverted. So just quickly select that cap, and we're going to do a flip. There we go, done. Okay, so now everything that is in, although it looks like I missed that one little poly, so let's try that again. One little poly back here that I totally missed. Got your spraying kit? Awesome. Okay, so I'm just grabbing it again, do a planetary projection again. Oops, I did a cylinder. UV planetary projection, and then now I look at it. Is it flipped? It is flipped. We'll select it and we'll flip it again. Now it looks great. Move it off to the side. Now I'm going to select my cannon, and basically this cannon should be cylindrical mapped. And so yeah, that's going to work out great if we just cylindrical map the cannon without any of the caps or the axles. We'll do a UV cylindrical map. Then I will click the little T. It's going to give me the option to rotate. I'll click the rotation value, and I'm going to rotate here. Looks like X on 90 degrees. And then here's what's important is we'll look at the seam. You can kind of see the seam as a white line if you have checkerboard on or your UV texture editor open. You can see that seam as a white line. If you notice, everything was fine, but it kind of did a zigzag here. And if you just rotate it around, it will flatten out. And that's great. So this is what you want. You want to start here, and then you want to make sure that we're not seeing any stretching. And there's really not too much stretching except for a little bit behind the muzzle here. What we can do is use the legacy unfold with the horizontal constraint. And what that does, kind of widens certain areas. And then here, what I don't want is these lines to go up and down. If they start going up and down, then it's going to be really hard to fix any ridges in the normals. And it just ends up being really, really clean normal bake if you keep your ridges flat in the pixel world. Basically, when this bakes down, it's going to be a pixel normal map. Pixel normal maps, because they're gridded out pixels, are going to work best if the edge lines align with the grid of the pixel. If you ever notice, you take a line in Photoshop at low res, you make it diagonal, you're going to see the pixels a lot more than if it's just flat. And so if you have ridges in a cylinder, always try to keep them as horizontal as possible. It's going to really, really help out in the long run. But there is still a little bit of stretching here. And what I'm going to do is not make it go up and down, but I will select that edge and just pull it out a little bit. And that is the way to, by hand, fix some of the minor stretching that the ridges have. Most of the time, the ridge stretching is not an issue at all. So I just mainly make sure to keep my seam at the bottom, and then make sure that I give it one unfold. This one was legacy pinning with the unfold constraint pinning the vertical, the horizontal, and that gave me exactly what I want at this angle. So that's perfect. I do have these two axles I need to fix, and if I look at them, it looks like they were a planar map at the wrong direction. So, but what I can do is I can select these two, We can expand them. I'm hitting Shift and then period to expand my selection, or Shift and comma to shrink my selection. What I can do is select these, just expanding it so it's grabbing the whole cylinder part, and then I'm going to use a cylindrical projection here. So click that UV projection cylinder. Now we want to rotate it so the axis is aligning with these cylinders. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees on the Y, and then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Oh wait, no, I did that wrong. Let's see. Rotate it 90 degrees on the X, and then let's do negative 90, and then 90 degrees on the Y. That way, when we look at these now, they're cylindrically mapped out, and really they shouldn't have any stretching or anything. They're a little big, but they shouldn't have any stretching or anything. That's perfect. Now I just need to select the caps and do a planar projection with the caps. So planar projection on the X value, and that gives me the caps. They are two separate objects, so I can use my selection components, UV shell, grab them, separate them. So now, this is where we have the cannon fully UV'd as far as all of the UVs are unfolded and projected correctly. But what is not going on is that these UVs are not the same textile density, and so there is one or two things I still have to do here. Looks like a little stretching on the interior of this cap. So if I right click, go to two UVs, convert these to UVs, then just make sure I'm not selecting the edge. But I can pull this in just by scaling it down, and that should fix that stretching in that one little spot. Okay, so what I like to do when it comes to the next step, which I still need to UV the chassis, but because the cannon's such a major part of this model, I do want it to be very, very large and go over the whole 0 to 1 space from top to bottom. So what I'll do is I'll shrink this this cannon in this main part of the cannon. I'm just going to focus on that and nothing else, and shrink that into. Ow! Damn, that hurt. Okay, cat, you need nicer. Okay, so I'm shrinking this into a space in which I can fit just the cannon fuselage. The thing is, this cannon fuselage should be very high res. It's going to be very important for it to be very high res. So I get it into the right space. I put it here, and then that looks good. That's what I want. I do want to keep it away from the edges of the 0 to 1 space. That's important. I don't want it overlapping 0 to 1, because then it would be tiling and you'd get some of the top of the cannon on the front of the cannon. I don't want that. So I want to keep it mostly in that space. But once I get this cannon shaped right, I can say get the textile density of that cannon. That's going to be 38. And I'll select everything else and say set. Now everything should have a decent textile density in relationship to the cannon. Now I'm just going to start packing them all in there. I still need the chassis to be UV'd, and this interior does not need to be nearly as big as everything else. But the wheel and the chassis, I think I can fit them in there. And I really want the cannon to have ultimately a pretty high resolution compared to everything else, because it is the hero of the whole scene anyway. So let's see, there are other ways you can kind of save some polys or save some UV space if you mirrored certain things, like the wheels and the chassis. I'm mirroring that, but I do want to get that cannon to feel unique in its own space. All of the textile densities are set. They're set at 38, so I want to keep them that way. Just kind of trying to optimize, move these things together. There's all kinds of ways you can use layout. I find layout isn't as good as doing it by hand. You're going to have a lot better UV layout if you do it by hand. It's just getting the textile density is a wonderful tool that Maya does really well. Okay, so I've got that cannon totally ready to go. Then I'm going to UV the chassis. I'm just going to spend another 20 minutes on this, and it should be all done. The UVs are just totally broken on that chassis. So why don't we start? I usually like giving it a planar projection. I don't even care what it looks like. I'm just moving it off to one side, and then I can start separating out elements that need to be separate. So this whole side should be separate. So I want to basically select everything that is right up to the edge. I'm going over the edge here, and that's not what I want. So I'll just deselect some of these. Control to by hand deselect each one of those polys. Any poly that's going around this corner, I don't need exactly to be connected to this shell. Look closely. Did I get them all? Just want to make sure that going all the way around the shape, I got all of the polygons. So yeah, that looks good. And then cool. Now I can do a planar projection from the side, do a planar projection. I guess it would be on the X. And it's kind of skewed because of the nature here. And so I just want to make sure that the projection width and height are the same values, and that's going to give me a square. That looks great. And move it off to the side. That one's done, so I'll just keep it up top. And then I will do some more grabs here and there. Looks like every now and then you're going to find something got kind of pushed around a little skewed from what it was supposed to be. Yeah, that one looks like a problem. So yeah, right here, somehow I skewed these guys around these couple of edges, and I'll just try to snap them back to this edge that they should be. There's just a few of them. And that's pretty much good. Okay, so there's just some minor stuff that didn't match the high res, and we're back to normal. Okay, so now I'm going to continue UVing this half of the chassis, and one way that I could deal with a lot of this is this whole center part is all the way up and down a big ring, and it's actually I'm gonna have to break it up, but I could use a cylindrical map to get it started. So I'll do cylinder. I'll move this cylindrical gizmo so that it's in the right cylindrical rotation value, and then it gives me this thing, which is not entirely right because there's going to be all kinds of squishes and skews, but here's an area in which I could use the legacy unfold and pin or constrain things vertically, or I guess it would be constrain them horizontally. And then what it does is it stretches it out, gets that whole ring all the way around to be 100% UV, and that looks great. So I'll just move that up. But if you notice, it's really, really long. Probably going to have to break it up into several pieces. So I'll find the places in which I can break up the seam. So this one, definitely a break in the seam. So what I do to break up my shells is I'll just find a good seam, and I'll go to my UV toolkit and say cut. And then anywhere that just feels like it's a little too long because it won't fit on the UV sheet, I'll just cut it there. And then, yeah, cut it right here. This doesn't aim. Same, okay. And then what you can do now that this is cut up is I don't have to do any kind of unfolds or anything. What I'm going to do is select my UV shell components, select them, and kind of start stacking them on top of each other. And then this way, they're going to be a little more optimized. The one thing that I need to do is set the scale, and I've already got that number set from the Canon. So we can say set, it'll scale all these down. It's probably going to scale this one up a little bit, and as you can see, it doesn't fit in that 0 to 1 space. So this would be a point in which I want to look for the best place to put a seam, and probably behind the wheel is the best place to put a seam. So let's do that. Put the seam right around here. It's probably going to give us the most optimization. And say cut, and then now if these are different UV shells, I go to select components, UV shell, I can kind of break this up into a couple of different pieces. It just kind of helps optimize this whole system. Okay, so there's a chance that I'm not going to have enough space to have my UVs and my of my cannon and my chassis to be the same. The chassis is very large. The cannon is large too, but I want the cannon to look prettier than the wood chassis, so the cannon is going to be larger. But I just want to get all the pieces in, and then I'll worry about the scaling and everything. Right now, I want to. This front area does need to be rather substantial and clean without any seams. So I'm going to select that whole front piece and do a UV projection on that. Planar projection on the Z value. Just want to make sure that the projection width and height are the same values, and then I can just move this over. The other thing I like to do, make sure I delete history before I do any more unfolds. History will cause some issues. Anyway, I can also do the, I can set the UV textile density on this one to 38 as well, and you notice how small it gets, and that's going to be helpful. Okay, so that looks good, and then I've got all of this stuff. Oh, it looks like there's a real small edge there. I don't even know where that came from.
Hey, Professor?
Oh, yeah.
I just got to let you know I got to head out, but I just wanted to say thank you before I left.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks for joining me, and you have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Yeah.
See you
Cool.
later.
Have a good day, Connor. I'll see you soon. Yeah, this will all be recorded and it'll all be up, so everybody will be able to access it. Okay, one little edge. I gotta fix that. Okay. Just this one little edge. I'll just stick it to the rest of it here. Okay. Let's see this one. No, it's okay if it kind of goes over the edge a little bit. Here we go. UV projection on the Z, and I'm just going to make sure that the values are the same. Okay. So that looks good. I've got this whole rest of it that I'm gonna just, do a little cheat on the parts that aren't as important. We'll do a automatic, and what that does, it just kind of breaks it up into a bunch of different pieces automatically. Usually does a pretty good job. So that's good. I will set the textile density of all of this to be the same. Okay, so where is it? Set, and then all the textile densities are good, and then I just need to make the wheel. The wheel is mostly UV'd, but it is not unfolded or anything like that. So we've got this outer edge here that is going to be, let's see, turn off the checker for a second. Going to be the outer ridge. It's going to be rather easy to UV it. Is just do a cylindrical map here. What is it? Where'd you go? Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to do a cylindrical map. There's the cat. If anybody that's watching this video is paying attention, okay, so I'm going to do a UV cylindrical here, and then I'm going to grab the rotation value and going to, let's see, rotate it on, what is it, the UV cylindrical, hit the T, and then I'm going to use that, grab the rotation values, we'll rotate the rotation values until it lands in the right axis orientation. And then the other thing I want to do is make sure that my seam is on the ground. Even though these wheels might eventually rotate, the seam is probably best to start on the ground. So there we go, put it there. And then what I can do is select the object, use the unfold, the legacy unfold, and let's see, horizontal unfold constraint. And I guess I also have to do a vertical unfold constraint because I'm almost positive that it needs that as well. So let's say vertical unfold constraint, horizontal unfold constraint. And yeah, this gives me, it looks mostly straight up, across, although at the edges it does act a little funky. That's okay, I can just one easy way to align would be to, in my UV toolkit, you've got the align tools. Where is it? Where is it? The move tools. Is that it? Yeah, transform, the move tools. There is a line snapping here somewhere. Is it? Cut seams, unfold, align and snap. There we go. So these align tools are very helpful because I don't want to break this straight line that goes through the cylinder. It's absolutely. So I use these align tools to align the direction that I want. So different aligns, they either align to the top one or align to the bottom one. Don't know why it wants to go all the way down, but there we go. All working out fine. Okay. Okay, so that's mostly good. You can see if I try to use unfold right now, I think it'll just kind of separate it out. But there we go. Yeah, this unfolds along U. That's exactly what I want. You see that really, really clean cylindrical unfold. Now I can select it, set it to the right pixel density. It's clear that this is rather large, but I can shrink it down. It doesn't have to be the same scale as the Canon. Anyway, so there's that. We've moved it off to the side. That whole outer edge is ready to go. Now we just have to look at the inner edge, and we're basically going to do the same thing with a cylindrical map. We're going to rotate so that the value aligns with the cylinder. There we go. You can see it being all S-curved, but when I align it to the cylinder, it flattens out. That's perfect. And then that is actually all I really need to do here. I know you could do some minor unfolds, but the stretching is so minor in these areas that it's not really a big deal. It's only in this one spot too. So you could literally just select that poly group and hit apply for the unfold, and it'll just soften that one little area. That's all we need to do there. If you notice, it's red, and that red is a problem because it is inverted or something. So what I'll do is with my UV toolkit, I will flip it, and it should be blue now. So it was red, that's bad. Flip, it's blue, it's good. So yeah, here we go. And then I set the textile density. Both of these are the same. That whole wheel is good to go. We've got these struts. Those are all the same. And, you know, that's probably going to be fine. I'll just set my textile density. What I like to do is, because they're all the same, it's a little boring. I like to grab like every other one. And then we can move these off. And then now you've got this and this. You've got two different struts, basically. They'll be baked down UV-wise separately, but it's just a good way of giving a little bit of variation so that we're not, we don't have everything, all the struts being exactly the same wood. Got this axle, that one's totally done. I just need to set the textile density. And cat, please not be on my keyboard. Thank you. Okay, and then, so yeah, I'm going to set the textile density on all of those. Looks good. Now, I think I have everything in place, other than like there's a bracket or a couple of things I missed, this back piece of wood. But let's just pretend this zone exists, and I'm going to select it all, including all of the struts. And then we'll look at it all together, and this is where the real work comes in at the end. I've just double-checked, made sure everything's about the same textile density, about the same UVs and everything. The checkers, no stretching. And then now I need to cram them all together. So I need to cram them, is where it becomes kind of like a puzzle. I need to cram them all together. Some things might get a little smaller, like this. It's going to be hard to fit in there. So I will make it a little smaller. I can make the cannon itself a little smaller. That's probably for the best, so that I can fit the wheel underneath it. So yeah, go a little smaller. So this is where, you know, I have to, there's some concessions that need to be made for just how all this stuff ends up working out. This is the outer wheel, so I do actually want that to be pretty big. So I'll leave that as the way it is. And then this inner wheel, it's okay if the inner one gets cut up here and there. So let's do that. So cut and sew. Just gonna cut here and cut here. And then now when I select my components, well, I guess I need to cut all the way to the sides. Make sure that it's cut all the way to the edges. Cut, and then over here I can cut it too. Usually you want as few seams, as few cuts as possible, but sometimes a long strip like this just won't really do, and so we need to figure out how to cut it up so that we can stack it, because if we stack it, it's going to be able to just play with everything else a lot nicer. So that's the wheel. These are the struts. We've kind of been thinking about the chassis, but we're missing some pieces in this whole thing. So what I could do, I could try the layout tool. I think like sometimes it gets everything in all right, and I could give it a shot in the way the textile density is set up. We could just try the layout tool at this point. Where is it? Arrange and layout, you can say layout, but it doesn't always do everything perfectly, but it got a pretty good job. I think what I don't like about layout is it tries to jam everything a little too close together. This is the interior cannon. I don't need it to be that big, so we can shrink that down a little. Okay, and then that layout, it's not giving me any distance in between the objects. That's a major issue. That's going to be a huge problem in video games if you don't have distance between your objects. So I'm going to give my pixel distance a little more distance in the layout. Can I do that? Is it letting me? Angle between pixel distance. It's not. Okay, measure. No. And this is one of the problems with layout. It just isn't as clean as the system as the other. So I'm just shrinking this down. I can flip it too, so that it's not red. Everything should be blue. But then now what I want to do is just kind of give a little space in between each object. This layout just really didn't do what I wanted, and so it's a little problematic. So I'm just kind of giving a little space. You don't want things too close to each other. They will cause issues if they're too close to each other. Also, the other thing I don't like about automatic layout is it just spreads everything out everywhere. And sometimes you don't want everything everywhere. Sometimes you want your wheels in the same place and your chassis in the same place. It just kind of helps out later. It also spread out all of these struts. So that's another thing that it added that I didn't really want it to add. But I think it ends up saving me a little bit of time here. Okay, so I just want to separate everything so that there's no point in which the models look like they're touching. If they even look like they're touching, you're going to have a problem. Whenever you move away from the model, it's going to be lower resolution. So it will create an issue with your textures will start to bleed over if it's lower resolution. So that becomes a major issue. So what I try to do is keep a little thin line, like there's water going in between every one of these UV shells. Wheel up here, so keep that where it should be. Is that? Yeah, I can just stitch that together and it makes it easier. Sometimes I'll cut it up and then realize it needs to be stitched later. Not a problem. Just use cut and sew and say sew, or stitch together. We'll move it so it doesn't stretch it when it cuts it, when it sews it. Okay. Still need to work on the UV shell, moving this around a little bit so that there's some space. Definitely having some overlap here and there is a problem. Moving these things around. Space to everything. You really think of it like there should be a little bit of water, a little bit of airspace in between all of the shells, because otherwise they will bleed over to each other. That looks good. Everything looks good. This one's red, and I do want that one to be blue. So I'll just flip it. And then a little space there. And then that should be ultimately everything we need. One thing that is very important is that the struts are all aligned in the same direction. That's going to make things really easy when we add wood in Substance painters. So everything looks good here. What I'm going to do next is export everything out as the Canon model, and then we will bake the normals in Substance Painter. One issue you'll find is that when objects are overlapping, sometimes they have major issues with their baking. So what I'm going to do here, I've got my low res, good to go. I'm saving, I'm deleting history. My low res pretty much good to go. I know there's going to be two wheels and two parts of this Canon chassis, but for the bake, I only need one to bake and texture it. So, but I do know that the Canon high res and the Canon low res need to be on top of each other. I'm going to very so gently move the Canon high res and the Canon low res up so that they're not intersecting with the chassis, because that will. Usually what you do is there's a way you can name them all correctly and they will bake correctly in Substance Painter, but that tends to be a hassle when you have a whole bunch of objects. So sometimes it's just easier to separate the high res out, or separate the major objects away from each other. So that being said, I separate them out. I'll do Canon low res. Just to be clear, they have to be on top of each other. You have to double check that before you export. So I got my Canon low res. We're going to export that. Let's see. Let's find my scene. Where are we? Current class, Canon, I'll just put it in this folder, and we've got, I'm going to export it out as an OBJ. We've got Canon low, and then I'm going to put all of those in the LOD0, and we're going to turn on the Canon high, where is it, Canon high res, and we're going to select all of this and export this. This will be Canon high. I just need to make sure that everything is mesh smoothed and not subdivision proxied, but I do want to grab all the bolts and all the things, and at this point, the specific texture, the material color will matter. Okay, Canon low, export that out. We got Canon high. Okay, cool. We're almost at the end here. I'm going to go open up Substance Painter, and we're going to bake these. I just want to bake the normals. That's all I want for class this week is just normals baked into the low res. Okay, so this is Substance Painter. We'll talk about this in detail this week, but if you want to get into the right place, we have to test our normals. So we're going to do a new model. I'm going to set it to 2048. It's most likely what you want the resolution to be. I'm going to select my low res. So you got Canon, Canon low, and then that's it. I'm just going to bring that in. Our low res will show up here. You'll see it. We can see the low res. This looks good. And then I will go down to my texture set settings. This is the only window that I'm going to focus on right now. You've got your viewport and your texture set settings. And that's where we bake our mesh maps. We're going to say bake mesh maps. And all this stuff looks good. The ID, if you click on that, I was using material color from Maya, and that's what we're going to keep. Keep that, and then go back to common. We need to change our output size to 2048, and then our high definition mesh. Select that, and we will bake this. Okay, this is what we want to see. If there is any major artifacting, that is a problem. You have to look into what is going on. If you are having problems, I will help you at the beginning of class. But the idea is that everything bakes down to the low res. If it's a very clean and cleanly UV'd model, you're going to get something like this, where from this distance, there is no polys, there's no low res normal, there's no blurry, and there's no stretching. Everything looks pretty decent. And then the final thing is that the material ID map is applied. You can see all those colors. I think if we see buttons does it. Yeah, this is the material ID map. Looks like there's some sort of issue with fighting there. I would it has something to do with two polygons being on top of each other, probably because of this one. Yeah, it looks like there's two polys on top of each other. So that would be the issue with the high res. Just need to select one shell, delete it, and then if we export the high res again and bake again, it should fix that ugliness. Select all this again, say export, Canon high, shouldn't take too long. And then, yeah, bake mesh maps again. Everything should already be set up, so bake mesh maps. No, it's still doing it again. I don't know why. Look at my again. Let's see. We've got these. They're still on top of each other. Yeah, there's still another one. Okay, so somehow this was grouped up 3 times. It looks like. If you ever grab a poly and you move it around and there's polys still there, that's a major issue. That means 2 polys are on top of each other. Now it looks like I fixed it. It looks like anywhere where it's yellow, it needs to be fixed. Down shift and period to expand my selection, which makes it so I can select a whole shell. Go. And then one more. Again. This whole wheel, we don't even need this side because we're only one side, so I'm going to make sure that this is This whole side is not existing. Now I'll just select all this, export out one more time, and that should be good. Okay, bake again. My right kit. Cool, now it's totally green, that's what I want. Okay, so if we look at it, most of it's good. Let's see, going back to, yeah, it's all green, that's good. There's a little bit of overlap here between the wood and the metal. That could be because of one issue, which is the max frontal ray, max rear ray. These are either too small or too big. I think in this case it's too big, so I'm going to make it just a hair smaller and then try it again. Yeah, it fixed it a little bit. Seems like it's only in the material ID is where any issues are showing up. The normals and the occlusion look pretty good. And with the material ID map, you can export that out and recreate it or clean it up. You go to your textures. It's going to show you the textures that you baked. The color map is your material ID map. I will export that texture out into Photoshop and then just kind of clean up any issue. Put it out. Okay, no, that's okay. So yeah, export it out. I just need to load Photoshop. See desktop. So what I could do is come into this one area that was clearly having an issue. We could just paint out that area. Other issues that show up is the normal maps sometimes have a little bit of an issue, especially around the ridges. But frankly, because of how clean I made my UVs, I'm not seeing any issues. But if there are some issues, sometimes you just kind of got to clean them up, just like this, where you bring it into Photoshop and paint over the normals just a little bit. You might use a smudge or something. But anyway, that's all we had to do on this one. I'm going to save it, and then we can bring it back in. Bring it back in by going to my file explorer, dragging it over Substance Painter, dragging it into this, and making sure that it is in the texture path, and it is in my current session. I can import it in. It's the new one, and I don't know if I should have renamed it or something, but I'll drag it over and should replace it here. And so now when we look at the material ID, and that way that will be metal and that will be wood. All I want for this week, I want everybody to stop here because we will move on and do materials in class next week. But this is basically where I want everybody to stop. If you are having any issues, if you're having any issues, you can hit up Kai, Oliver, or me, and we will try to help you out with your issue. But also, if you do end up finding yourself having issues right before class, we'll talk about it then. I just want everybody to have their normals worked out, the normals working, and then when we move to do the Substance Painter stuff, we won't be confused about what we're looking at. Okay, so that is just about everything that I want people to get to today. The one thing that I left off that I usually talk about in class is how to get your normals working in Maya. And frankly, you do want to test them before you add any grit or crunchiness to it. And that's something that I do want people to avoid, is if we have way too much crunchiness or way too much bump map all over our materials, it's just not going to look good. So I want us to avoid that. But what we do is we test our materials by seeing, or our normal maps, by seeing what direction the light looks like it's hitting a bolt. If the light is coming from above and it looks like it's hitting the top of a bolt, we're good. If the light's coming from above and it looks like it's hitting the bottom of the bolt, that usually means the green channel needs to be inverted. We'll go over that in the beginning of next class. We'll talk about normal maps pretty heavy. But that's something that we always have to deal with, and this is just kind of the nature of normal mounts. We always have to check them to make sure they're working correctly. It does look like my wheel is just a little off somehow. I don't know what happened. Did I accidentally move something here? No, it's this ridge. This ridge got moved. That's what it was. I can just pull it back into place. Anyway, just there's always some minor little thing we have to fix. We bake our normals, then we see the issues. That is pretty common. So bake our normals, and then we see any issues we're having, and we go and trim. Yeah, that ridge was kind of off some reason. Now, if I took my high res and exported it, we shouldn't have that problem again. But that's about it. That's all I want to talk about. I want everybody to kind of get to this stage and then bake your normals, test it out, see if you're having any issues. And the main issue that most people tend to have is that the high res and the low res are not on top of each other in the same space. And I'm just going to double check that because there might be some sort of reason that could be the case. It does look like my wheel has moved for some reason. So yeah, there was some major issue. Select my whole wheel. I don't know how it moved like that. Let's see, it most likely moved on the high res, but I'm not seeing. Yeah, I'm not seeing a specific input that made it move. So I could just take my low res and just move it over a little bit so it matches the high res exactly. I don't know how they got off, but like I've said, there's always a problem. There's always something. So just double check it. If you're having a problem, there's usually a reason for it, and